The boy thought he knew that risking one's life was an extremely difficult thing to do. Whether it was work, sports, hobbies, or gambling, in 2034 Japan, it was difficult to abandon everything in pursuit of something. The MC had not attended school enough, nor had he worked enough even as an adult. He had literally risked everything, devoting himself entirely to his goal except for the bare necessities of food, sleep, and excretion. He was simply dead set on reaching the very top, the absolutely flawless first-place rank recognized by everyone in the world, an existence revered by everyone practically as if he were a god. He was the strongest ruler in history, one who had never tolerated even a single defeat. That was him, the MC, undisputedly him. The MC was the world rank first in the fully immersive Vermorp called Mobius Online by a wide margin. His achievements in life, everything he had in life, all of it became history that day. The other day, his main character, named Seven, had been hacked and deleted. It was not only his own offline data, but everything ranging from backups and so on, and he was not the only one harmed. There were 3,000 players, all of them high-ranking players. The MC heard that the culprit was one of those high-ranking players and had carelessly resorted to crime out of envy. Yet there was no way the culprit could have carelessly carried out something like hacking the character data of 3,000 players. It was a deed done out of aberrant determination. Afterward, the Mobius Online admins announced that they were unable to restore any of the affected characters. The only compensation they could offer was a special promotion on charges and so on when creating a new character. Upon reading the announcement, the MC threw off his VR in anger and shouted a curse. No matter how many times people inquired or raided their head office, the admins gave the same response. After letting out his frustrations, the MC slumped on his bed, thinking that he could not find the will to do anything. Nothing came to mind. All he could do was sigh. He would never get his first-place status back again. The MC sat up and told himself that he could not remain in distress forever. A wide grin crept onto his lips. He decided that, all right then, he would simply die. To his surprise, however, when he opened his eyes, he found himself in a strange world. As he looked around, the place slowly became familiar. It was Mobius Online. At the same time, he wondered when he had logged in. Just then, a girl angrily called out to him for blocking the way and zoning out in front of her store. When the MC faced her, he recognized her as Icicle's poster girl, Isejon. He was used to hearing her voice, but he had never heard her speak in such a manner before. The MC wondered whether some update had been implemented while he was unaware. Meanwhile, Ice's cheeks quickly turned red as she stared at his face. Stammering, she apologized and asked whether he had some business with her store. The MC was confused by how she had suddenly become gentle and was even blushing. Without a second thought, he called her cute, thinking that it would not be an exaggeration to say that this was a godly update. At his remark, Ice's face turned crimson red. With a shaky voice, she reacted in embarrassment before entering her store. The MC watched her from outside and thought that what she had done earlier was magnificent behavior. Chances were that some sort of rapport system had been implemented during the time he had not been logged in. Then, when he saw his reflection, the MC was surprised. It was not the same character after all. It was not Seven. It was Second. Second was an alt character he had made at the same time as his main character, Seven. He still had not trained it in any way. It was simply a mule character with 0 XP. The MC, now in Second's body, let out a deep sigh and concluded that it was hopeless. He could no longer find the will to play Mob Ion all over again and decided that he would simply log out as quickly as possible. However, when he tried, he could not log out. More precisely, he could not even open the settings screen. Second wondered whether the game had bugged out. For the time being, he considered pressing the emergency stop button to return to reality. Slowly, the truth dawned on him. A smirk formed on his lips. There was no reality anymore. He had already died, so why had he forgotten? Yet one puzzling thought remained. If he was dead, why was he inside Mob Ion? He wondered whether his world in the afterlife was Mobius Online. No, he was certain that he had wished from the bottom of his heart that it would have been wonderful if he could have been born into the world of Mob Ion. If it had been possible, he would have preferred being born into a game's world. Even if he said so himself, those had been rather pathetic last words. Second wondered whether they might have actually come true. He quickly pinched himself, and the sharp pain made him gasp. Shocked, he realized that it hurt even though this was supposed to be a game. If Isejon's un-NPC-like remarks and the reason he could not log out were the same phenomenon, then he could accept it. But if that was true, then he had been reborn in a game world. Tears burst into his eyes with joy. He repeatedly cried out that this was the best and expressed his gratitude. Forgetting himself entirely, Second danced around like a madman for almost an hour, making strange noises. Compared to the happiest moment of his life, when Second had seized first place in the world, he was now several dozen, several hundred and several thousand times happier. Just then, a guard grabbed him and held him down, placing him under arrest. The guard turned to Ice and asked whether she was certain that he was the right person. Ice confirmed that Second had been causing a ruckus in front of the store and asked the guard to take him away. Second broke into a cold sweat. Moments later, Second was at the Third Chivalric Order station. A woman interrogated him about why he had done something like that, and Second explained that he had simply gotten a little excited. The people in front of him were members of the Third Chivalric Order of the Kingdom of Castal. In layman's terms, they were the police, and Second was being questioned at their Chivalric Order station. The woman examined him and, judging from his appearance, wondered whether he was a noble, what family he belonged to, why he was alone, and what had happened to his companion. Second replied that he was not a noble. He secretly glanced at her, thinking that she looked like a lovely, dignified female knight. She was not merely cute but beautiful as well. However, he had never seen an NPC like her before, which made him wonder whether she was exclusive to this world. The female knight glared at him before slamming her hands onto the table. She made it clear that noble rights held no weight before the Third Chivalric Order and that anyone who violated the law was a criminal. Crimes were evil and evil would be judged. Protecting good citizens was their duty, and that was justice. She demanded that the corrupt noble confess, having already obtained significant evidence. Second calmly maintained that this was precisely why he was saying that he was not a noble. However, his words were immediately cut off. Second realized that there was no point in continuing because the girl could not be reasoned with. The female knight suddenly calmed down and concluded that he was refusing to answer. She then decided that she had no choice but to take further action. Gripping the hilt of her sword threateningly, she prepared to draw it at any moment. Seeing this, Second grew nervous and quickly asked her to wait, indicating that he would talk. The female knight lowered her hand and remarked that he could have done so from the beginning. She then demanded his name and occupation. Second gave his name as Second and stated that he was an adventurer. However, the female knight immediately accused him of lying. Second was troubled and wondered what he should do. The female knight narrowed her eyes at him before pointing out that his outfit was tailored too well to possibly belong to an adventurer. It looked fairly expensive. Hearing that, Second finally understood that his equipment was the culprit. It was not as flashy as his main characters, but he had put rare clothes on Second so the character would look nice. That was why he was being mistaken for a noble. It was seriously bad news. The friction between the lower divisions of the Third Chivalric Order and the nobles was a well-known story. This female knight had been piling up grudges under the upper divisions, who had been deeply colluding with the nobles. She was essentially a constable overflowing with a sense of justice, and judging from her appearance, her sense of justice was clearly greater than that of the average person. Second realized that this was bad. He had nothing to prove his status, and had no idea what he should do. The female knight demanded that he confess what he was scheming. Her words were cut off when a man entered the room. Without warning, he lightly bonked his fist against her head and reprimanded her for being a bloody dimwit. The man glanced at Second and acknowledged that his subordinate had been impolite. He would take over the questioning instead. Second nodded in response. The man apologized to him and explained that they suspected Second might be deliberately obstructing business, so he would have to answer some questions. First, Second needed to briefly explain his social status and intentions. Second gave his name and stated that he was 17 years old and an adventurer. Inwardly, however, he knew that his actual name was Satsuo Shikaru, that he was 28 years old, single, and unemployed. He had entered 17 years of age as this character's status, so he answered with that instead. The man acknowledged his answer and explained that witnesses had reported seeing Second dancing and making strange sounds in front of a grocery store. He wanted to know why Second had been doing such a thing. Second explained that he had unintentionally zoned out and apologized. The man took this as a confession and then asked about his intentions. Second explained that he had not planned to cause trouble for the store and did not have any particular intentions at the moment. Inwardly, he found the situation insanely pathetic. Somehow, this place had made him fully realize that he was now in a proper society. The man sighed and confirmed that Second was claiming he had not deliberately obstructed business. Second affirmed that he had not. Afterward, Second compensated the grocery store ICC and was released. He wondered whether this society could really function like that. ICC's compensation had been only 150,000 CL. That amount of money could not even sufficiently afford armor at a tier where he would not look like a noob wearing it. At present, Second had a little over 2 billion CL. Without wasting a moment, he had immediately changed into attractive rare clothes, which had incidentally been mistaken for a noble's clothing. He also had adequate full-body armor that he had bought. The total cost was 2,300,000 CL. Whether that was considered high or low remained a mystery to him. Somehow, the prices of things seemed different from the Mabayon he knew. That meant he needed to investigate the value of currency in this world as quickly as possible. Just then, his stomach growled loudly. The timing was perfect. He would have a meal, which would also make it convenient and easy to determine the value of money by checking the price of something like a meal with a night's stay. Second spotted an establishment nearby and decided that it should be fine. He believed there was a bar on the first floor. He immediately entered, and a young lady stepped forward to welcome him. Second asked about the price for a night. The lady did not respond at first and simply stared at him. After a brief pause, Second asked again. She suddenly snapped out of it and stammered an apology before confirming that he was asking about the price for a night, fumbling over her words. In the back of his mind, Second felt that he had received the same sort of reaction when he first met Isejan. The receptionist girl was acting fairly suspicious. At last, she regained her composure and explained that it would cost 7,000 CL per night, including breakfast and dinner, while a stay without meals would cost 4,000 CL. Second was surprised by how cheap it sounded. Then it hit him that the full body armor he had bought must actually have been insanely high class. He decided to stay for 5 nights without meals. The girl quickly accepted and handed him the key. As their hands brushed, she froze, and her face instantly turned bright red. Second blinked, puzzled by her reaction, and wondered about the strange feeling he was getting. Shortly afterward, he headed to a pub. Sitting alone, he casually scanned the room and noticed several girls secretly glancing in his direction. Then it finally clicked. He understood that he completely stuck out like a sore thumb because of his appearance, especially to these girls with their passionate gazes. His avatar was the reason. This was the result of setting up a limited-time premium avatar to be exceptionally beautiful. Even if an ordinary character was beautiful in an online game, nobody would look at the player, but it was an entirely different story when that character became a real person in a real world. Inwardly, Second smugly realized that in this body, he was beginning to fully grasp the reality that this place was no longer the inside of an online game. A shiver ran along his spine, and a pleasant feeling passed through him as a smile unintentionally escaped his lips. His efforts here would not be futile in any way, not in this supreme world where he believed that nothing lay beyond. The words thrown at him before he was reincarnated echoed in his mind. Even if he tried his best at an online game, it was completely pointless. Another voice had told him to hurry and return to reality. Someone else had insisted that it was useless even if he became number 1 in the world in a game. Others had told him to attend school diligently, work seriously, and think about what he was planning to do from then on. But in this world, the reasonable arguments he had repeatedly been given and the dissatisfaction buried in the very depths of his heart were all nullified. A small laugh escaped his lips, and soon he found himself laughing openly. Second lifted his head, his eyes filled with resolve. He had decided to become number 1 in the world again. The next morning, Second woke up groaning in pain. He had gotten too carried away the previous night, and guzzling down alcohol he was not used to had been a bad idea, even if it had been for the just cause of celebrating his reincarnation into a parallel world. He was even suffering from a hangover. Second stood up and considered that, since this place was no longer the inside of a game but reality to him, there were many skills in Mabayan that were considered necessary. It was out of the question for him not to acquire them. The nature of the game in Mabayan was primarily built around an experience point system. He needed experience to learn skills and raise his stats, which meant earning experience came first. Acquiring experience was simple. He only needed to either defeat monsters or accomplish quests. The skills covered an enormous variety of fighting techniques, magical powers, and craft. Each skill had established rankings, from the 16th class to the 1st class, followed by the 1st grade to the 9th grade. There was also a special rank known as the title. Moreover, experience points were required to raise a skills rank. The way stats increased also differed according to the growth type selected when creating a character. Of course, a tremendous amount of experience was needed to increase stats as well. Shortly afterward, Second went to the bar on the 1st floor and ordered a serving of curry rice from a nearby waitress. The lady welcomed him warmly. Unaware of the constant glances being directed his way, Second sank into deep thought. That reminded him. He had known it. The growth type of the character named Second was the same as that of his character 7, an all-rounder type. When acquiring experience as an all-rounder, his stats grew equally without any deviation. The good news was that this type was suited for becoming number 1 in the world, but the bad news was that it was a jack of all trades and master of none. Just then, the waitress returned with his order and apologized for keeping him waiting. Unlike a specialized type, whose stats could end up stretching oddly, an all-rounder could flawlessly raise all of his stats at once. It could be considered overwhelmingly advantageous to be an all-rounder type. In exchange, however, the initial development was considerably more intense than that of the other growth type. If that was the case, Second had no choice but to use it. That method. After breakfast, Second went to the potion specialty store and requested as many bottles as they had of the Detoxify, Dispel, and Recovery High potions. The staff were left speechless. The old man eventually found his voice and warned that, including the ones in storage, the purchase would amount to an astonishing sum of money. Ignoring the warning, Second asked how many they had. The old man explained that they currently had almost 630. Second decided to take all of them. The two staff members were shocked because the potions Second had purchased were high potions strengthened by 2 steps, with detoxifying, dispelling, and recovery effects. Each one cost 120,000 CL. At 120,000 CL multiplied by 630 bottles, the total would be 600 million thousand CL. After regaining their composure, the man immediately brought the potions and apologized for keeping Second waiting. Second decided to buy all of the potions at once with cash and cram them into his inventory. Before leaving, he also requested nearly 9,000 more bottles and asked the staff to restock them for him. The two staff members were left standing there with their jaws wide open once again. The reason Second needed all of these high-class potions was a tactic formerly known as the DK tactic in Mabayon. It was a cheat-tier method of earning starting experience that had originated in an old 8-bit game called Dinosaur Quest. The method involved throwing fixed damage items at enemies with high evasion in order to defeat them. Second had thought of using this method to earn experience. The truth was that these potions, which possessed detoxifying, dispelling, and recovery effects, could also deal fixed damage to undead enemies. The Detoxify, Dispel, Recover High Potion Plus that he had bought that day each dealt a fixed 1,200 damage to undead enemies. That amount of damage was just enough to whittle away the HP of an intermediate-level monster called the Viper Zombie, which possessed a relatively generous amount of experience even among undead enemies. In other words, by throwing these potions at Viper Zombies, anyone could annihilate them, even a beginner or a 3-year-old child. However, this method was only used by alts belonging to some high-class players because it required an insane amount of money. To earn a sufficient amount of experience, at least 10,000 of these potions were needed, totaling 1.2 billion CL. The only people capable of preparing that kind of money without batting an eye were, as expected, those who had a main character on the side. Therefore, the DK tactic was an exceedingly superior way of earning experience in the beginning, but it was strictly useful only at the start. Once a player became an intermediate player, the method was no longer viable. Second went to the stables to purchase a horse. He chose the black horse and decided to name it the 7th Taio starting that day. Second smirked at the thought that the day had come when he would have to resort to this. With that, Second began his journey. He eventually stopped at a cave. While walking inside, he noted that he had already put nearly 2 hours of horseback distance between himself and the royal capital. He believed there was a well-known hunting ground inside a large cave behind the mine, but there was not a single soul there. Perhaps the DK tactic had not been discovered in this world yet. Perhaps the potions were simply too expensive, so nobody used it. Or perhaps there were not that many beginners. Whatever the reason, it was not exactly a mystery to Second. The absence of anyone else meant that he could hunt all he wanted. After looking around for a few moments, Second finally found what he was looking for. Sensing his presence, the Viper Zombie turned toward him. Second immediately shuddered in disgust. In the end, they looked 100 times more disgusting than they did inside a game. Without wasting a moment, Second forced himself to get the task done quickly so he could head back. He hid behind a rock and carefully peeked at the monster. After spotting it, he began throwing potions one after another. Each bottle shattered on impact, and the Viper Zombie was instantly defeated. Second's face lit up with delight. Somehow, it felt good. After purging it, Second moved on to the next hunting ground and repeated the process indefinitely. By the time he returned to the first hunting ground, the Viper Zombie had spawned again, allowing him to purge it once more. Without taking a single break, Second continued throwing potions at the monsters non-stop until all 630 bottles had finally been used. The amount of experience he had gained was fairly passable. If he kept this up, Second would soon have gathered almost all of the necessary skills and would also be able to raise his skill rank. Having lost track of time, Second continued. Second cursed under his breath, realizing that the sun had probably already set. He decided to return. Riding back the way he had come, he eventually halted when he reached the royal capital. He planned to eat a meal, get drunk, take a bath, and then sleep. Just then, a familiar woman called out to him, asking who he was. Second immediately sensed that something bad was about to happen. He was fairly certain it was that dense yet beautiful female knight named Sylvia, or something like that. Second hopped off his horse and thanked her for the previous day. Sylvia replied grumpily, recognizing him as the second punk from yesterday and questioning what he was doing out so late at night. Second stared at her doubtful eyes and realized that he was being questioned. He explained that he had been at the mines for a while. Sylvia repeated that he had been at the mines and questioned what he had gone there for. Second explained that he had gone to earn experience at the large cave behind the mines. Sylvia narrowed her gaze, clearly unconvinced, and told him that he should at least make his lies realistic. She could not understand why he would deliberately go to such a dangerous place simply to defeat monsters. Hearing that, Second furrowed his brow and asked what she meant. He added that he had simply thought the viper zombies there were rather delicious. Sylvia responded flatly and concluded that he apparently had no common sense, or perhaps that Second had a screw loose in his brain. Second could not help thinking that the girl was irritating. Then it hit him. Had she just said that the place was dangerous? Second asked Sylvia whether he could ask her a question. After receiving her approval, he asked about the number of dungeons. In his thoughts, he recalled the dungeons of Mabayon, which could be considered paradises. There were 21 of them in total. Players all attempted to raid them together, pooling their intel, while each one sought ways to explore them easily. Sylvia, however, was puzzled by what he was talking about. There were 19 dungeons, not 21. Second immediately understood what that meant. He asked how many of those dungeons were currently being raided. Sylvia gave him a puzzled look before answering that 13 were obviously being raided. Second silently realized that this could not be true. Shrugging it off, Second indicated that he understood. He thanked Sylvia and asked whether he could leave. Sylvia told him to hurry off. Without another word, Second continued on his way. He had more or less understood the situation now. In this world, people died when they were killed. In other words, there were not many people desperate enough to put even their lives on the line just to become stronger. Somehow, everything was over once they died. A smile spread across Second's lips. He already possessed all the intel that players in Mabayon would have had to risk their lives thousands to tens of thousands of times to acquire. Second smirked. He might be able to reach number 1 in the world earlier than he had expected. The next morning, Second began his journey again. He thought that once they had earned a certain amount of experience, their next destination would be this place, the Grand Royal Library. The reason for coming to the library was related to the skill acquisition system in Mabayon. In Mabayon, there were primarily 2 conditions for acquiring skills. The first was reading skill books, and the Grand Royal Library contained multitudes of them. A librarian politely asked Second what he was looking for. His eyes fell on her chest, but he quickly indicated that he was fine. The librarian then left. Second scanned the surrounding bookshelves. Although the requirement stated that he had to read the books, simply flipping through their pages would fulfill the condition. With that in mind, he began moving through the bookshelves at a reasonably quick pace. Before long, Second found the books he was searching for. This time, he intended to learn 2 fundamental skills for both the swordsmanship and archery arts, along with the 4 different elements for the skill called the Ichi no Kata, or Opyo form, in sorcery. There were many kinds of skills besides swordsmanship and archery, including spearmanship, unarmed combat, and shieldmanship. Each of these combat-type major skills had 9 kinds of minor skills: pawn, spear, knight, silver general, gold general, bishop, castle, promoted bishop, and promoted rook. This time, Second planned to acquire the pawn and spear skills for both swordsmanship and archery. He managed to acquire everything without difficulty. Next was sorcery. Sorcery consisted of 4 elements: fire, water, wind, and earth. Each element had 5 types called the Opyo, Raptor, Coeurl, 4th, and 5th forms. The grimoires in the Grand Royal Library were the same as those from the last time he was in Mabayon. Since only the 4 elements of the Opyo form were available, Second assumed that the other grimoires could be obtained at the Royal School of Magic or by completing high-difficulty quests. While considering this, he finished acquiring the Opyo form without a hitch. He had now finished reading all of the fundamental skill books he wanted to learn from the library, so Second decided to head back. On his way out, he saw the librarian fall to the ground after accidentally bumping into a man. Second narrowed his eyes, then shook off the thought and continued on his path. He could not help but think that the library had provided an abundant harvest. For his following plans, Second decided to train in a specific order. First, he would earn experience while maintaining a degree of safety by using long-range fire with archery. Second, he would solidify his position with swordsmanship, which dealt effective damage and was easy to use. Third, he would prepare his trump cards for harder enemies by using the high firepower of sorcery. The fourth was conjuration. The limited-time avatar he had bought when he created this alt named Second had included a premium spirit ticket. Using it would immensely raise the likelihood of summoning a rare spirit, leaving no reason not to improve his conjuration. However, there were limits to using conjuration as a primary means of battle, making it strictly an auxiliary skill. It would be best to begin raising it after archery, swordsmanship, and sorcery had been improved to a certain extent. Now that his plans had been promptly decided, Second allocated his experience points among the skills he had acquired to raise their rank. The weapon shop came to his mind. With that, he began upgrading his skills. For archery, he allocated only the borderline amount necessary to fight. For the Opyo form of sorcery, he raised it to the 5th class so that its casting time would be reduced. For pawn swordsmanship, he gave it enough to provide some insurance for situations in which he was forced into close-quarters combat. The experience points he could distribute to raise the skills this much had run out. Second decided to settle for what he had, as the fundamental skills were sufficient for now. If he needed more later, he could return to the Grand Royal Library to acquire them. Next, Second decided that he needed to learn the necessities of archery. The necessary skills for archery were not limited to pawn and spear, but also included knight, silver general, gold general, bishop, and castle. Each had its own special skill. Knight archery had precise shot, silver general archery had the powerful solo strike, gold general archery had spread strike and its knockback, bishop archery had the powerful pierce strike, and castle archery had the extremely powerful solo strike. Among these, knight archery, gold general archery, and castle archery were the most necessary. Learning them alone would increase the number of tactics available to him by 1 or 2 digits. However, these skills differed from the fundamental pawn and spear skills. Second went to the weapon shop and bought a long bow. As for the other condition for acquiring skills in Mabayan, he needed to complete skill quests. Nonetheless, if he was only trying to fulfill either one of the acquisition conditions, there was no need to accept any actual quests. After he paid, the owner thanked him, and Second continued on his way. He killed a monster on horseback and gained a new skill, knight archery. He then killed 20 more monsters in a row with a single shot each, gaining another skill named silver general archery. The next moment, he killed 10 monsters in a row within 3 meters and learned a new skill, gold general archery. Bishop archery was somewhat tedious because he needed to fulfill 2 conditions. He had to kill 5 monsters simultaneously using spear archery, then kill 2 monsters simultaneously at least 25 m away using a combination of spear archery and knight archery. With that, he finally learned bishop archery. Last but not least was castle archery, the most tedious yet most powerful amplified strike skill. Even at the 16th class, it was capable of single strikes that exerted 250% of pure firepower, and if raised as far as the 9th grade, that scale jumped to an astounding 600%. It was an extraordinary practical single-strike skill that could exert immense firepower more easily than any other archery skill. However, its acquisition conditions were exceptionally tedious. Even if all of the other tedious skills were combined, castle archery would likely rank among the worst 10. First, Second needed to kill 1,000 monsters using silver general archery and then achieve 500 critical hits using silver general archery. Those conditions would naturally be fulfilled as he continued going along, so they were not a major concern. The real problem was the final condition. He needed to kill 3 monsters in a row that had attacked and drained at least 50% of another player's HP, at least 5 m away, with a single shot each using a combination of knight archery and silver general archery. Second already found the requirement tedious just thinking about it. If he made even one mistake, he would have to do it all over again. It was downright hell. Second considered that if this were still the inside of an online game, he could ask some people to hold off until their HP had been drained by 50%, making the condition relatively easy to complete. But this was the real world now. Having 50% of their HP drained was ultimately life-threatening, making such a request futile. He wondered what would happen if he were to make that sort of situation occur 3 times, then quickly shook off the thought. That was even more futile. Even so, Second wanted castle archery no matter what. It was an absolutely indispensable skill in archery. He concluded that he had no choice but to accept the situation and fill it with something else, finally deciding to give up on completing the conditions for now. Inevitably, he chose to bury away the requirements of using silver general archery on 1,000 monsters and achieving 500 critical hits with silver general archery, simply awaiting an opportunity. That opportunity arrived in an unexpected way. It had been a week since his reincarnation. Second had taken advantage of the decay tactic, and had also raised his other skill ranks nicely. With that, Second decided it was time for swordsmanship. Just then, a loud scream echoed through the forest. From the other side came a man's curse as he attempted to cut open a path, but something struck him before he could finish. Second hid among the bushes and secretly watched. Then he spotted the monsters, scarlet mantises. At that moment, Second's eyes froze as he took in the scene. Humans and monsters clashed amid coarse breathing and clanging weapons. The smell of soil, the trickle of blood, the fear and the screams filled the surroundings. It was nothing like the Mabayan online world he knew. From his hiding spot, Second counted 5 people who had fallen to the ground and were not moving an inch. 5 more people stood ready with their swords drawn, forming a circular formation. At this rate they would be tormented and killed as well. A grin spread across Second's lips. With 5 people, he might be able to learn castle archery this way. He hesitated, considering whether he should wait until those 5 people's HP had been drained to gain more certainty. Then it struck him that he might indeed be able to learn castle archery this way. But this was not right. People were dying. They were not players. They were people, the same as him. Those people had lost what they had risked their lives for, only to accomplish it halfway. Now they were going to lose it again. Second could not simply let that happen. Such despair was intolerable. Without hesitation, Second emerged from the bushes, gripping his longbow. He warned the warriors to get down. The warriors turned toward him in surprise, but quickly snapped to attention and passed the warning to the others. Without wasting a moment, Second used his spear archery, 5th grade. He released an arrow with precision, striking his targets, and the monsters were defeated instantly. The warriors stood in shock. The knights stood in shock, and among them was Sylvia. Her eyes widened as she stared at Second. She could not help but think about how gallantly Second had rushed in during their predicament. His fearless posture reminded her of the world's number one. Sylvia's first impression of him had been absolutely terrible. She had thought he was merely a young noble boy who lacked common sense, had been raised comfortably in a spoiled environment without knowing hardship, and never considered how his actions might cause trouble for others. And yet, that man had obliterated 6 scarlet mantises in no more than 20 seconds. He had done it with an ordinary longbow and the improbable power of archery. Sylvia could not help wondering just how much intense learning he had accumulated. She also thought about herself. Ever since she was young, Sylvia had aspired to follow the path of the knight, coming this far with only a single blade in hand. However, it had been futile. No matter what she did, it was futile. Her family had ridiculed her for lacking talent with the sword. Even after finally joining the Third Chivalric Order, she found that they were at the lowest level of the law and spectacularly lax. Her strength had never been exhibited. They simply regarded her as some little girl who constantly annoyed them with her insistence on justice. Yet she could not even enforce that justice. Whenever she exposed and pursued a noble for their injustice, she was always pressured by her superiors. She had come to completely despise those wretched dogs in power. Even now, with her comrades dead, those rotten upper echelons were desperately trying to recruit their lifesaver, Second Dano, into the chivalric order. Sylvia clenched her fist. She questioned whether this was what the chivalric order was really like, and whether this was the image of a knight she had once yearned for and sought to become. If so, then she had already. Meanwhile, somewhere in town, a man spoke to Second about whether he had any intention of joining the Adventurers Guild. Second repeated the name of the organization with annoyance. In his mind, he had expected them to thank him for helping them during the fight, only to discover that those had been the old man's very first words. The man apologized and acknowledged that he had rushed things a little too much. He explained that he had heard Second Dano was an adventurer who was not affiliated with any guild. Second remained silent, thinking that he certainly was not affiliated with them, but there was no reason for him to be. The Adventurers Guild of the Kingdom of Castal was an organization that coordinated the agencies handling requests such as monster subjugation and carried them out. In reality, however, it was a dirty organization that exposed adventurers' personal information to the kingdom in order to allow it to unilaterally control them. Second knew this because it had been recorded in Mobian stories. He finally gave the man a response, respectfully declining the offer. The man was somewhat surprised and did not think it was a bad proposal. Second explained that he was not particularly worried about money and disliked being tied down by organizations. The man scratched his head and was about to add something. Second asked the man what it was, but the man dismissed it as nothing. He explained that the chivalric order would not want to let an exceptional freelance adventurer like Second Dano slip away. The incident this time had made Second Dano's true strength particularly clear to them, and in such a situation, the privileged had become eager to recruit him. Second questioned whether that meant the Adventurers Guild was going to protect him. The man confirmed that this was what it would amount to. Second smiled, but found the situation suspicious in his mind. The man claimed that his true strength had been made greatly apparent, yet the only witnesses at the scene had been members of the Third Chivalric Order. Second could not help wondering why they wanted him affiliated with a guild so badly. He felt that such an affiliation would only become a factor holding him back from becoming the world's number one. Second therefore decided to refrain from becoming affiliated after all. The man accepted his decision, then added that, in that case, Sylvia would accompany him. With the Third Chivalric Order at his side, they would be able to keep tabs on him to a degree. Just hearing Sylvia's name made Second shudder. The man continued by explaining that he was not sure what means could be used to convince a noble like Second Dano to join. Sylvia was famous even in the royal capital as a knight who was strict against nobles. The man thought she would be able to keep tabs on him reasonably well and wondered what Second Dano thought. Second furrowed his brow. He found the old man's endorsement of Sylvia quite dreadful. However, he did not know their true objective. Sylvia was strict against nobles, while the upper echelon of the chivalric order was tied to them. In other words, the chivalric order regarded Sylvia as a thorn in their side. Second wondered whether they were looking to demote her. If that was true, then it was an extremely good proposal for him. A duck with a scallion or not, it was a unique chance to gain a beautiful female knight as a comrade for free. Second asked how long Sylvia would stay with him. The old man told him to ask her himself. Just then, Sylvia arrived in her casual clothes. Second's eyes did not leave her. The old man informed Sylvia that from then on, she would take responsibility for being Second Dano's escort. As for the term, the chivalric order would consider respecting her and Second Dano's opinions. Upon hearing that, Sylvia was surprised. Second thought that her surprise was inevitable. This was an actual demotion. Furthermore, the old man's claim that he would respect Sylvia's opinion essentially implied that a single word from him was enough to decide Sylvia's term. It truly seemed that the chivalric order thought negatively of her. The old man asked Sylvia whether she had any particular desires regarding the term. With no choice, Sylvia replied that she did not. Her fist remained clenched against her chest. At the same moment, Second could not take his eyes off her. When he finally snapped out of it, he found the old man already judging him with a look. Second cleared his throat and proposed a term of 2 years. He thought that as long as he had those 2 years, he should have more than enough time to pursue the world's #1 position. The old man accepted without hesitation. And like that, the female knight Sylvia became Second's escort. After the meeting, the old man had a private talk with Sylvia, but her mind was elsewhere. She could not help thinking that this was a demotion and that the chivalric order was getting rid of dead weight. Sylvia was the second daughter of the Knight Order of Virginia. Becoming a knight and distinguishing oneself in battle was the duty of those born into the Virginia family. However, it had been futile for her. She had no talent for the sword. She had been scorned by her older brother and sister, as well as by her parents. She was a failure. Even after she had finally become a knight, it was. Second snapped her out of her thoughts and suggested that they make a deal. He suspected that the old man had told her to seduce him into joining the chivalric order or something similar. Sylvia jolted in surprise. She could not understand why he was saying that. Second Dano had suddenly started saying something like that, and it was possible that too many shocking things had happened at once. Sylvia answered that she would hear what Second had to say. She was unaware that the deal would greatly change her life from then on, forever. Second began by explaining that he was sure his dear Sylvia wanted to work proudly as a knight more than anything, and that he wanted to help her. Meanwhile, Sylvia could not help thinking about Second Dano. Her heart had skipped a little when he called her by name directly. He had an extremely superior appearance, yet until this very moment, she had never had time to become engrossed in love because she had always been focused on her sword. However, after drinking mead like this, those kinds of feelings were beginning to well up inside her. Second continued by suggesting that if she was sick of her current situation, she should build the resolve to quit the Third Chivalric Order once and for all and go out with him. Hearing that, Sylvia's cheeks flushed red as she stammered in shock. Second quickly tried to calm her down, explaining that he was making a deal. Still flushed red, Sylvia forced herself to calm down. This was just a deal. It was not a proposal at all. She quickly drank the drink in her hand in one gulp. Seeing that she had calmed down somewhat, Second continued. He assumed Sylvia could not stand yielding to those wicked authorities. In that case, she simply needed to build up adequate power, and he had the means to make that happen. Sylvia's face turned serious. For 13 years, ever since she was 4 years old, she had always trained herself with the sword, yet she had not carried out a single act of justice. Silence spread between them. Second scratched his head and apologized before frankly suggesting that if she lacked talent for the sword, she should simply try something else, such as the spear or the bow. Sylvia's eyes widened. In anger, she grabbed Second's collar. She could not believe he would say such a thing after everything she had endured up until now. Sylvia gritted her teeth, but then something struck her. She released her hands from him. She finally admitted that Second Dano was right. She had grown stubborn. Even though people kept telling her that she did not have the talent for it, she continued training with the sword. Knights were champions of justice who wore armor, wielded swords, rode horses, and came gallantly running in during predicaments. Sylvia had always wanted to become a knight. A prominent knight. A champion of justice who would never yield to the likes of evil. Tears welled up in Sylvia's eyes. She wondered how she could be so pitiful. Her tears began to fall. Second frankly told her to stop arbitrarily forcing her aspiration for a knight into such a narrow form. Anything could serve as a weapon. What mattered was being a champion of justice who came gallantly running in during predicaments. Sylvia fell silent, thinking that he was right. There was no need to be obsessed over the appearance of a knight. What mattered was gallantly running in during a predicament. Sylvia's eyes widened as an image of Second flashed through her mind. She remembered the moment he had come to save them, and her gaze filled with wonder. After a moment, Sylvia finally made her decision. She told Second Dano that she would go out with him. Second's lips curved into a pleased smile at her response. Meanwhile, Sylvia stared at his face with wide eyes, her cheeks flushing red before she hurriedly looked away. Second then continued by saying that, in that case, he would share his dream with her. With that preface, Second spoke with great zeal about becoming the world's #1 no matter what. It was a big dream, astonishing and laughable at the same time, Sylvia thought. However, his smile as he spoke about it was like that of a little boy, and his eyes sparkled. In that case, Sylvia wanted to try going with him and helping him. She was sure interesting things would happen. She could be confident of that. It was her first time experiencing such a refreshing night. Her future had brightened. Later that night, after the discussion, they parted ways and returned to their rooms. Second sat on his bed. Slowly, the smile spreading across his lips turned into a loud laugh, and his laughter echoed outside. He had not expected things to work out this well. He had gotten a heartbroken girl drunk and then won her over with an extremely dirty tactic, but he was sure it would be for her sake as well. Sylvia probably had talent in archery or sorcery. Considering that she had practiced swordsmanship for 13 years and was still completely helpless with it, Second could only imagine that her growth type was either DX aligned or INT aligned. There was also a chance that she was a production type, but whatever the case, it did not matter. Getting a comrade was incredibly significant. This way, his security in battle would shoot up. Managing to win Sylvia over after getting her to sever her ties with the troublesome chivalric order was significant as well. It was as if, in just one single day, he had killed 2 birds with 1 stone. No, 3 birds. No, it was actually 4 birds. Frankly, when he defeated the Scarlet Mantises were not really significant monsters. Considering his current status, it would have been strange for him not to win. Come to think of it, that meant this had been the perfect opportunity. He had also managed to learn the castle archery he had been longing for. Second could not help but smile in excitement as he thought about how fun the days were going to be starting tomorrow. First of all, for Sylvia's training, she would need to acquire the necessary skills for swordsmanship. He also wanted to head into dungeons to earn EXP, and it seemed interesting to try hunting for rare item drops as well. Another wave of laughter escaped him. Meanwhile, the receptionist outside was puzzled by why he was laughing again. With a puzzled face, Sylvia asked about magic archery. Second explained that he thought being a magic archer specializing in sorcery and archery would probably suit her. Sylvia's DX was 121, her INT was 103, and all her other stats were in the double digit. She was a DX type, while her INT was also unnaturally high, which meant she was suited to the magic archer type. Sylvia had never heard of magic archery before. Hearing that, Second wondered whether it did not exist in this world. He could have sworn it was a relatively popular job in Mabayan. That was not good. Second asked whether she knew of any skills that combined sorcery and archery, but Sylvia did not. Second shrugged it off, explaining that something like that did exist and that she would be aiming for it anyway. Still confused, Sylvia accepted. Second instructed her to first acquire the fundamental skills necessary for archery at the library. Afterward, they would head to the forest, where he would have her join him in acquiring the necessary skills for swordsmanship. Sylvia looked completely puzzled. Second felt as though he were somehow teaching a newbie the basics of Mabayan again. He told her that was all she needed to do and that she should simply follow him. Sylvia's eyes remained on him, and Second gave her a questioning look. Sylvia smiled and agreed. Second was a bit taken aback by her sweet smile. Afterward, in the forest, Sylvia looked completely shocked at how Second knew such things. Second calmly asked why she was so angry. Sylvia explained that she was not angry but dumbfounded. Things such as the acquisition methods for bishop archery and castle archery were the most hidden of hidden facts. They were intel that nobles inherited for generations and had to keep to themselves. After hearing that, Second finally understood. That explained why the levels were low in this world. He realized that nobles did enjoy having privileges after all. Sylvia warned that if he tried to let nobles know about something like this, he would be tortured to death. Second asked her to keep the intel to herself. Sylvia protested that if she used such advanced archery, she would be exposed instantly. Second calmly reasoned that she simply should not use it in public. Sylvia paused as she realized that was possible. Afterward, while bringing Sylvia along, Second was continually bothered by her questions everywhere. He got her to acquire knight archery, silver general archery, gold general archery, and bishop archery. Like him, Sylvia also managed to learn them without difficulty at the time. At the cave, Sylvia wiped the sweat from her forehead and admitted that although it felt as though she had already experienced a lifetime's worth of surprises that day, Second casually remarked that it was still too early to be surprised. Sylvia flinched. Second then asked how she thought he had used these methods to raise his EXP. Hundreds of bottles of high potions were suddenly transferred to Sylvia. Shocked by the sight of so many expensive potions, Sylvia wondered whether Second was seriously telling her to put all of them into her ass or something. Second quickly denied saying anything of the sort. He explained that they were going to use them to perform the DK tactic. Sylvia remained confused about the DK tactic. Meanwhile, Second thought that the loudest what of the day would surely echo through the cave. Just as he expected, Sylvia's scream rang across the cavern in shock. Later, they returned to town. While eating, Second asked Sylvia whether she wanted to learn castle archery. Sylvia answered hesitantly that if she could learn it, she would like to. Second immediately decided that they would go to a dungeon that day. Sylvia was shocked by the prospect of going to a dungeon. Second thought that this time they would explore a second-ranked dungeon called Roy's. Dungeons were separated into 3 ranks: first, second, and third, with the first being expert, the second intermediate, and the third beginner. There were 2 reasons for suddenly entering the intermediate Roy's dungeon. First was the reward for conquering the dungeon. Roy's dungeon's boss was a large wolf-like monster called Flame Wolf, which dropped a rare weapon called the Flame Wolf Bow. It was a superior long bow endowed with fire elemental effects, and second wanted to acquire it no matter what. The greater goal, however, was Sylvia's acquisition of castle archery, which could be considered the main objective. The ideal monsters for fulfilling the completion requirements appeared in this dungeon. Simply put, their objective this time was to search for rare drops while fulfilling the skill acquisition requirements together. Sylvia cautiously looked around, remaining alert. Just then, Second announced that he had found them, causing Sylvia to gasp in surprise. He explained that these were the monsters they had come for and instructed Sylvia to try defeating them with Silver General as best she could. If she was not used to it yet, she should also practice combining Knight with Silver General. Sylvia accepted the instruction. Without hesitation, she grabbed the string of her longbow and pulled it back, carefully aiming at the monster before releasing the arrow. The monster was defeated instantly. Sylvia froze where she stood before tremblingly asking Second Dano whether she had somehow become incredibly powerful. Second noted in his thoughts that with the DK tactic, Sylvia's EXP had skyrocketed, and both her Knight Archery and Silver General Archery had reached the first grade. He gave a confident smile and reminded her that he had promised this. Sylvia's eyes widened before she broke into a bright smile, acknowledging that he had and thanking him. Meanwhile, Second could not help but think that she was pretty beautiful like this, though usually she was like that instead. Afterward, Sylvia became uncontrollably excited. She was in perfect condition and extremely helpful as backup, and she now seemed suddenly zealous. Sylvia declared her determination to become a magic archer. Suddenly, Second noticed something ahead and immediately told Sylvia to stop. He thought that it had been almost 6 hours since they entered the dungeon. They were now down to one last aforementioned requirement for Sylvia to acquire castle archery. The aforementioned requirement was to kill 3 monsters in a row that had attacked and drained at least 50% of another player's HP, from at least 5 m away, with a single shot each using a combination of Knight Archery and Silver General Archery. The reason they had stopped there was because their target monster had appeared. The ground trembled with every step the giant monster took. Second noted in his thoughts that the flaming troll was a large monster with exceptional attack power. However, its shiny, smooth cranium was a very obvious weak spot. For a headshot, a single shot with Sylvia's first-grade Silver General Archery should be enough. He could see 3 flaming trolls before him, making the situation perfect. Second then glanced at Sylvia and instructed her to use a combination of Knight and Silver General to fire at their craniums from at least 5 m away. She was to fire after he gave her the signal. Sylvia accepted but wondered what Second was going to do. Second vaguely explained that he was going to embrace the inevitable and warned her not to lose her cool no matter what. Sylvia immediately nodded. Second then checked his stat. His HP was full. In terms of numbers, his VIT should be enough to withstand 3 critical hits from the flaming trolls. A nervous sweat trickled down Second's face as he forced himself to believe that everything was fine. But it was not fine. This was seriously frightening. Even so, this step was absolutely necessary for the rear guard for castle archery, and he had to resolve himself to endure it there. Just then, a powerful strike hit him in the face, sending him flying through the air. Seeing this, Sylvia called out to Second Dano. Second hit the ground and wondered what had happened, finding the attack unheard of. He coughed up blood and checked his stats again. Even after that hit, his HP had barely decreased by a quarter. Second worried about whether his back teeth would recover. If this had been Mabayon, even losing an arm could be recovered by drinking a high-grade potion, but he had forgotten that there was no guarantee of that in this world. He began to question whether this had been a bad idea. Second pushed himself to his feet, refusing to accept that it was over while Sylvia was still waiting for him. The massive troll towered over him. Second froze in horror, but shut his mouth and forced himself to stand his ground. He was the number 1. The world's number 1 would never show an unsightly side. He resolved that he would become the world's number 1 in this world too, even if he was an alt character. He was the world's number 1, and the throne was his. It was his life, his raison d'être, and he would not give it up to anyone. He was the world's number 1. Second continued repeating those thoughts in his mind until the fear dissipated, then bravely faced the troll. He braced himself for the attack. Just then, the troll struck him hard with its weapon, slamming him into the wall before sending him to the ground. Second wondered about the impact and immediately checked his HP. Seeing that it had been reduced to just under 50%, he signaled Sylvia to fire. Sylvia, standing by at a distance, aimed her arrow and released it with precision. It struck the troll's cranium and defeated it instantly. Second smirked, knowing that only 2 more remained. Sylvia immediately rushed toward him, furious at his reckless actions. After everything was over, she scolded Second while crying, tears welling up as she continued calling him a fool. Second, however, continued to smirk. They exited the dungeon. Sylvia was shocked that she had finally learned castle archery and could hardly believe it was real. She repeatedly expressed her amazement to Second Dano, overwhelmed by how incredible it was. Seeing her rejoice, Second smiled, feeling an extremely uncanny sense of satisfaction. From the depths of his heart, he felt glad that he had endured. His alt-character life in this alternative universe would now be filled with excitement after acquiring this comrade named Sylvia. After what happened, the 2 of them pulled themselves together and advanced through Roy's dungeon. All that remained was the boss. Second warned that beyond the door was the home of the Flame Wolves. The boss of Royk's dungeon, the Flame Wolf, was a powerful monster with a large wolf's body dressed in flames. Its flame barrier made it sufficiently resistant to damage, and everyone in Mabayon unanimously judged it to be a pain in the ass. Second decided that they would stunlock it. Sylvia was confused by the unfamiliar term. Second recalled that he had once managed to turn the Flame Wolves into the equivalent of trash-tier small fry, and the main reason for that had been stunlocking. He checked whether Sylvia was listening before explaining the plan. First, he would attack using bishop archery. The Flame Wolf would continue running toward him, so he would repel it using Gold General. Afterwards, Sylvia would attack it using bishop archery and repel the Flame Wolf rushing toward her with Gold General. He would then fire at it using bishop archery, and the process would be repeated. Second noted inwardly that this was a convenient technique for conquering the Flame Wolf, and that its name was the ultimate gold bishop stun. It was a famous stun technique performed by 2 or more people. Sylvia hesitated over whether such a simple method would actually work. Second explained that it had nothing to do with whether it worked or not, it was simply the safest method. With that settled, they proceeded. The 2 of them defeated the Flame Wolf and died. 3 weeks later, Sylvia acquired castle archery without a hitch. All that remained was obtaining a drop called the Flame Wolf's Bow. They ventured around Roy's dungeon every day and killed 100 and a few dozen Flame Wolves before the bow finally dropped. Sylvia exclaimed over the Flame Wolf's bow and concluded that Second Dano would now become even more powerful. Second cut her off, questioning what she was talking about and explaining that the bow was hers. Sylvia was shocked upon hearing that. Second reminded her that she was going to become a magic archer, so there was nothing wrong with her using the bow for the time being. He handed it to her and explained that he was going to shift towards sorcery from then on, leaving him with no particular plans to use it. He told her to put it to good use. Sylvia hesitated over whether she could really have such a fine bow, but Second confirmed that it was fine. She then thanked him. She glanced back at him, wondering what he had said just before. Second flatly repeated the description of Sylvia as a motormouth numbskull. Sylvia gasped in shock at the remark and wondered whether he had really said something like that. Second clarified that he was shifting to sorcery. Sylvia understood that this was what he had meant, but pointed out that she had never heard him mention it before. Second apologized for never having told her. Sylvia pouted for a moment before smiling. She reflected that it had been archery, then swordsmanship, and now sorcery, and wondered whether becoming the world's #1 was no longer just a pipe dream. Second acknowledged that he still had a long way to go. He then decided that he needed to consult her about what would happen from there. Sylvia repeated the matter of connections to a Royal Academy of Magic. Second confirmed that she was the second daughter of the Knight Order of the Virginia family and asked whether she had any connections or something similar. Second noted inwardly that learning sorcery skills involved reading grimoires. Grimoires for the Opio form could be found in libraries, but the Raptor and Coral forms were fundamentally only found within academies of magic. No matter what it took, he had to infiltrate an academy of magic. The reason he had to infiltrate one ultimately had to do with saving time. The Royal Academy of Magic was off limits to anyone who was not a teacher or student. Second could take the formal route of enrolling to gain entry, but he was unsure how much time would pass before he was actually enrolled. That was why he wanted to leverage some connections and have them permitted to explore the Academy of Magic for a short while. Sylvia explained that it was impossible. Her father had abandoned her for having no talent with the sword, and she could not imagine him granting a request from such a useless daughter. Second suggested that, in that case, she should show her father her capabilities now. Sylvia refused, explaining that her father would remain strict even if she did. Her father had distinguished himself in battle through his own swordsmanship and had become knighted. He would likely say that she had abandoned the sword and escaped to the bow. Hearing this, Second realized that Sylvia's concern about being unable to deal with her father was becoming serious. He guessed that a frontal attack would work here. Since he had no other choice, he decided that he could only deceive Sylvia's father. Second told her that he had a good idea. Sylvia gave him a suspicious look, feeling that she was getting a tremendously bad vibe about it for some reason. Second smirked and announced that they would have an overall strategy, which he called the deception tactic, and that they would put it into action the next day. Sylvia broke into a cold sweat, feeling that her heart was not ready. The next day, Sylvia's father knelt and showed his respects as he welcomed Second. Second was filled with disbelief and wondered inwardly how things had become like this. He had gotten Sylvia excited by calling it the deception tactic, but all he had actually planned was to wear some rare clothes, act like a foreign aristocrat, and deceive Sylvia's father into writing them referral letters to the Academy of Magic. Somehow, he had remarkably deceived Sylvia's father, Noir-san. It appeared that Noir-san believed him to be of foreign royalty. Second could not understand what degree of strange misunderstanding had led to this. In the end, Second felt compelled to tell Sylvia's father the truth for many reasons, though he no longer understood any of it himself. He told Sylvia's father to raise his head. Second realized inwardly that he could no longer turn back now that things had come this far. He would try persisting with this somewhat prestigious persona and act as much as he could. Second explained to Noir that, due to some circumstances, he was concealing his identity and assumed that Noir-san understood. Noir confirmed that he would not tell another soul. Second inwardly smirked. He had simply taken a chance blindly, but it looked like everything would work out after all. Second explained that he had come with 2 requests that day. Noir politely assured him that whatever Second Dano requested would be granted. Second reminded himself that no matter how much of a numbskull Sylvia's father was, he must not lose focus. He decided to begin with the trivial request. He wanted to establish a connection with the Royal Academy of Magic and asked whether Noir-san would be able to do something. Noir confirmed that he could, adding that if Second was looking to transfer in as a first-year student, he could write him a referral letter immediately. Second muttered inwardly that becoming a transfer student would not be good. It would last too long. He only needed to infiltrate the academy for a short while and blaze through their grimoires. Second explained to Noir that he would prefer a shorter stay and asked whether there were any ideas for accomplishing that. Noir suggested that Second could instead assume the form of a short-term exchange student. Second understood and acknowledged the idea. He then considered how long the exchange should last. He would prefer it to be as short as possible, but if he went there for only 2 to 3 days and failed to find the whereabouts of the grimoires by then, it would be bad. Since he had his doubts, he decided that perhaps he should choose a period that was a little longer. Second finally decided on 2 weeks and told Noir that he would make it 2 weeks long. He asked Noir to write him a referral letter with those details. Noir agreed to do so. Second continued by confirming that, if nothing more was needed for the trivial request, they could move on to the important request. Noir agreed. Second got straight to the point. He explained that this lord had taken a liking to Sylvia and that she possessed talent for archery and sorcery. He asked Noir-san to permit her to travel by his side. Feeling Noir's intense stare, Second worried inwardly. Although he had not thought of a first-person pronoun on the spot, he wondered how referring to himself as a lord sounded. Noir-san stared at him in wonder, which made Second realize that it might not have been a good idea after all. Noir gasped and asked Second to raise his head. He acknowledged that Sylvia might be an undisciplined daughter, but if His Highness was fine with her, he could use her however he wished. Second inwardly repeated the title of His Highness. Noir then questioned whether Second was truly certain about Sylvia. Second explained that she certainly lacked talent with the sword. However, her skill with archery and sorcery could surely be considered world-famous. This lord assured Noir-san that Sylvia should leave the chivalric order to accompany him. Noir echoed in disbelief at Sylvia possessing such talent. Second added that he had borrowed her from the 3rd Chivalric Order on a 2-year contract. Once the contract was over, he planned to request that she become his, and at that time, he wanted Noir Dano's support. Noir replied with due respect that he would certainly provide it. All he asked for was a flourishing service for Sylvia. Even as he remained there on his land, he would patiently wait in his home for the praises that would surely arrive. Meanwhile, Sylvia's face turned bright red. Second secretly glanced at her and wondered what Noir Dano was really saying, but he guessed that it could be considered an acceptance. Second smirked and remarked inwardly that Noir Dano's spirit was admirable. He would never forget the Virginia family. Afterward, once they were outside, Sylvia shouted that Second was a dummy, an even bigger dummy. No matter how many hearts she had, it would not be enough to deal with being together with Second Dano. Meanwhile, Second reflected inwardly that although they had managed to secure their connection to the Royal Academy of Magic, somehow things had taken a turn far more drastic than he had expected, which was a little frightening. Deceiving people was not something someone should do. He had reflected on it a tiny bit. A week passed since the reception tactic had been used. Since then, Sylvia and Second had been selling flame wolf pelts, earning experience points, and enjoying a fairly perfect lifestyle. They primarily earned experience from slime-type monsters. If they advanced deep into the slime forest on the way to the mines from the royal capital, there was a place within where rare slimes with juicy experience often appeared. Their greatest find, there was a drop they managed to obtain from a holy slime called Recovery Sorcery Wand Med. It was an ultra-rare item with a 0.05% drop rate. As long as they had the Recovery Sorcery Wand Med equipped, anyone could easily use Recovery Med from Recovery Sorcery. It was an extremely useful item. In particular, characters whose growth type was set to the healer type could manifest its true worth when equipping it. When healer types used it, it granted a plus effect. While plus was a second-tier boost, adding it meant that the wand's effect could be expected to become 2.5 times stronger than normal. When it came to Recovery Med, a plus boost could cause at least half the HP of someone at an intermediate level to recover instantly. Even things such as broken back teeth required only a trivial amount to recover. Second told Sylvia that they would head to the Academy of Magic now. Second noted inwardly that, when considering how the wand could reduce their consumption of high-class potions that cost 800,000 CL a pop, the power of this additional effect became clear. Since neither Sylvia nor Second had the healer type set as their growth type, they could not gain the plus effect. Nonetheless, being able to use Recovery Med unconditionally was already significant. It was all thanks to the Holy Slime, and Second considered it a magnificent gift from him. Even the guy over there was happily going behind those blades of grass. And now, at the Royal Academy of Magic, after earning some items and experience, Sylvia and Second bided their time and finally arrived at the Royal Academy of Magic. After dismounting from their horses, a woman welcomed them and confirmed that their arrival had been expected. Second thanked the two professors for going out of their way to pick them up. The man asked whether he could call him Second-kun. Second agreed and introduced himself as Second, adding that the girl beside him was Sylvia and that they would be counting on the two professors to look after them for the next 2 weeks. The woman stepped forward and introduced herself as the headmaster, Paula Memento, expressing her hope that they would get along nicely. The man then introduced himself as Kevin, the homeroom teacher of the first-year Class A that Second-kun was slated to enter, and expressed his hope that they would get along well. Second asked whether Sylvia would be in the same Class A as him. Headmaster Paula confirmed that she would, explaining that during their exchange, Second would be lodging in a house rather than their dormitory, so their rooms would not be separated. She then suggested that they proceed, as their uniforms had also been prepared. While following them, Second muttered inwardly that things seemed fine for the time being. It did not seem like anyone particularly suspected them, but they would need to remain focused over the next 2 weeks. Professor Kevin informed them that they would be holding a lesson in the morning and that he was considering giving them a tour of the school in the afternoon. Second asked whether Professor Kevin would be giving him the tour. Kevin explained that a student would do so instead. He had recruited someone from Class A the other day, and it had already been decided. Afternoons were generally self-study periods, but their superior students had free time. Second acknowledged this and expressed his thanks. In the back of his mind, he planned to squeeze information out of his guide once the afternoon arrived, although he would only be asking about the whereabouts of the grimoires. Professor Kevin then informed them that they had arrived and that this was Class A. Professor Kevin entered the room first. He greeted everyone and announced that, as he had informed them all the other day, 2 exchange students would be joining Class A for 2 weeks starting that day. He then called for Second-kun and Sylvia-san to come in. Immediately, all eyes turned toward the two of them. Second introduced himself first, stating his name and explaining that he had come from an island country called Zipong to check the place out. He expressed his hope that they would get along well. The girls in class could not help but shriek upon seeing him smile. One girl exclaimed over how handsome he was. Another wondered whether he was not terrific, while someone else remarked that he was seriously super hot. Sylvia stepped forward and shyly introduced herself as Sylvia Virginia, adding that she hoped they could all get along. Kevin thanked them and directed the two of them to their seat. While the girls could not take their eyes off Second, the boys were equally struck by Sylvia's striking appearance and whispered among themselves about how cute she was. Kevin told everyone that, since this was a rare occasion, they would review the basics once more. Meanwhile, Second wondered whether he would even be able to learn the sorceries he needed within the next 2 weeks. He was becoming somewhat worried, and once the lesson was over, he planned to quickly have them show him around. After class ended, Second went straight to Professor Kevin and asked him to introduce the person who would be showing him around that afternoon. He explained that he was thinking of getting a ready-made meal and deepening his friendship with the guide. Kevin smiled and agreed. He then called for a boy named Main-kun. The boy stepped forward and asked whether the professor had called him. Kevin asked Main whether he was ready for the afternoon tour. Although the schedule had been sped up, Kevin also asked him to show Second-kun the cafeteria. Main agreed that it was fine. Second excused himself and asked whether he could also ask Main questions about sorcery. Second reasoned inwardly that it would be better to ask first before trying to strip information from Main, since he would rather not risk disadvantaging himself by doing so. Kevin assured him that it was not a problem at all, as Main was the representative of the first years. Second understood and realized that his question had been foolish. A grin spread across his lips as he thought about Kevin's description of Maine as the representative. Wouldn't that mean he could strip whatever information he wanted from Maine? Second turned to Maine and suggested that they get along well during the tour. Maine smiled and agreed, expressing the same sentiment toward Second-san. Second thought inwardly that this was good. Maine was not being cautious toward him, so he planned to squeeze the whereabouts of the grimoires out of him this way. Before that, Second informed Sylvia, who was surrounded by their classmates, that they were heading to the cafeteria. Sylvia agreed, then apologized to her classmates and asked them to let her through. She hurried over and apologized to Second for keeping him waiting. However, the moment she noticed who was standing beside him, she froze in shock. Her words stumbled as she addressed Maine as His Highness. Second's eyes widened in surprise as the title echoed in his mind. Maine calmly explained that there was no difference in status inside the school and asked her to treat him as an equal if possible. Sylvia nervously apologized and corrected herself by addressing him as Maine Dono. Meanwhile, Second reflected that Maine was a prince. It was his first time seeing one here. This was different from what he had expected. He had imagined Maine saying something like making everyone kneel, yet Maine had instead asked to be treated as an equal. Second guessed that he should do so then. Without warning, Maine grabbed Second's hand and led him toward the cafeteria together. Second stared at their joined hands and wondered inwardly how Maine could be so cold toward a beautiful girl like Sylvia while being so assertive with a pretty boy like him. It felt as though he was being pulled into something. Could this guy really be that way? The thought seriously bothered him, and consequently, Second decided that he needed to genuinely face Maine about it as well. He could hardly believe that the day had come when he would be targeted by a prince. Second wondered how he should reject Maine. Nervous sweat trickled down his face as he concluded that he could only ask Maine directly. Second suddenly stopped in his tracks and confronted Maine about whether he swung that way. Maine halted immediately and turned toward him in shock. He loudly denied it and demanded to know what Second was talking about all of a sudden. Sylvia stood there with her jaw hanging open. Second explained that it simply seemed as though, instead of Sylvia, Maine was a little like. He trailed off while wondering how he should put it. Maine gasped in disbelief and demanded to know what Second meant by that, insisting that Second was mistaken and that he was completely straight. Second calmly accepted the explanation. At that moment, a small girl suddenly bumped into him. Second glanced down but did not see anyone. He looked around, wondering whether he had just bumped into someone. Perhaps it had been his imagination. Meanwhile, the girl continued along her path and quietly remarked that the man was super handsome. With sparkling eyes, Maine told Second that he was fond of him. Sylvia stared at Second, wondering what was with his proud attitude. Second explained that they were talking to the world's #1 man. Sylvia's jaw dropped wide. Meanwhile, Maine exclaimed that this was exactly what he meant about Second-san, saying that it was his first time talking to such an honest person. He explained that he had been thrilled when he heard that differences in status were disregarded if one enrolled in the Royal Academy of Magic, but in the end, everyone only saw him as the second prince. Whether at the Royal Palace or at the Academy, they saw him as nothing more than the second prince. It really seemed that only his mother saw him for who he truly was. Second commented that it was a pretty typical story. Hearing that, Sylvia smacked his chest, accusing him of being impolite. Maine quickly stopped her, saying that it was all right and pointing out that she was talking to a man who, right after realizing he was a prince, had bluntly asked him if he swung that way. At this point, impoliteness or anything else no longer mattered. Shrugging it off, Second asked Maine if he knew where the grimoires were stored. Maine explained that, if Second meant inside the academy, there were some for the Opo-Opo and Raptor forms in the library. The Coral form was also in the library, though permission from the head librarian was required to borrow it. As for the fourth form, Second interrupted to ask whether they had it there as well. Maine replied that they did not, believing that the fourth form was being safeguarded at the royal palace since he had seen it there once before. Second understood. Maine then said that it was probably about time they headed off, and he proceeded to guide them. They were being bloody courteous to the point that Second wanted Maine to spare them his afternoon tour of the academy. By the time they arrived at their main dish, the library, the sun had already completely set. Maine informed them that they had finally arrived at the library, though it was already closed. He added that any student of the Royal Academy of Magic could use the library and urged them to visit it as soon as tomorrow. He then waved at them, expressing that today had been super fun and that he would see Second-san and Sylvia-san tomorrow. After Maine left, Second released a heavy sigh, his shoulders feeling stiff. Sylvia replied that this should be her line. Second gave her a questioning look before informing her that starting tomorrow, Sylvia was going to be confined to the library and would learn fire magic. Second noted in his thoughts that, to acquire magic archery, mastering sorcery was necessary. At the very least, He wanted her to learn the raptor form of fire and the coral form of fire to use in combination with the flame wolf's bow, which was imbued with fire. Just then, a loud laughing voice echoed from behind. One man remarked that Second knew, right, before adding that, nevertheless, he had seen them, those exchange students. The man beside him nodded and confirmed that he had. They looked scary, both the guy and the girl. The other man added that he had seen them together with His Highness Maine, and there must have been something going on with them. The other man asked if he meant that bookworm with an Oedipus complex. The first man tried to stop him, warning that he should not say something like that, but the other assured him that it was fine because nobody was listening and admitted that he was honestly thinking the same thing as well. Meanwhile, both Sylvia and Second hid themselves behind the walls, eavesdropping. The man continued by expressing how much that guy certainly irritated him, especially with his condescending look. The prince always sounded sarcastic whenever he said something about not worrying over his status. That was why the prince was always alone. The other man burst into laughter, pointing out that the prince was completely alone and deserved it. The man laughed in agreement. Meanwhile, Second worriedly thought that the gossip was giving off a seriously unpleasant vibe now. So Maine had been alone after all. That said, Second wondered whether this could be considered indirect bullying. He supposed he had no choice, then, and decided that he would become the prince's friend. Perhaps he would be able to build a connection with the Castal royal family and get them to show him the fourth form's grimoire. He felt that he totally had no choice. The man added that the prince spent a lot of money to get his grades changed and was becoming cocky despite being the prince. The other pointed out that the prince was becoming rather detestable, even though he pretended to be a damned honor student on the outside. The man added that becoming buddies with those so-called exchange students was just as bad, saying that trash should quietly file up together before dismissing it as a joke. The other man smirked in agreement and added that, if they were going there, they had to include that beast loser too. The man agreed, saying that he had forgotten about him, that failure as well. He burst into laughter, but when he glanced to his side, he suddenly stopped upon realizing that it was Sylvia. Meanwhile, Second was surprised to see that Sylvia was now standing before those guys. The man gasped in shock upon realizing that she was the exchange student. Sylvia glared at him angrily, calling him a bastard and demanding to know whether what they had said was bestial discrimination. The man could only stand there in stunned silence. Sylvia repeated the question, again asking whether it was bestial discrimination. The other man quickly denied it, explaining that she probably did not know about Eco Leaflet, a loser in Class F. The first man backed him up, saying that Eco Leaflet was seriously incompetent and only happened to be a beastfolk by coincidence, so they were not discriminating against anyone. Sylvia responded that, if that was the case, they should explain why they had called Second Dano and her trash. The men immediately broke into a cold sweat. One of them nervously tried to reassure her that she would understand if they explained. Without warning, Sylvia smashed their heads with her fist and shouted that it was too late. The men quickly ran away. Sylvia then smiled in satisfaction, declaring that justice had been served. As she proudly puffed out her chest to herself, Second told her they should head back. Meanwhile, he could not help thinking about what the men had mentioned earlier. The beast loser called Eco Leaflet seemed worth remembering for now. The next day, in the afternoon, Second went straight to the library. He told the librarian that he wanted to read the grimoires for the raptor form, all elements. The librarian smiled and assured him that there was no problem, asking him to give her a moment. Shortly after, she returned and gave him what he had requested. Second scanned through the grimoires about the raptor form of fire. After closing the book, he proceeded to the next one and handed the book to Sylvia. She wondered whether he was already finished. Second confirmed that he was and that he had acquired it. Sylvia could only marvel at how it was just another day for him. With Sylvia glancing at Second from the side in amazement, he casually and lightly flipped through the remaining 3 books as well before handing them over to her. He had learned all of them. Meanwhile, Sylvia sighed, wondering whether she could even learn this in 2 weeks. She asked Second Dano if he had any tricks or something he could share with her. Second paused, thinking about how much he hated terms like tricks, secrets, and key points. In his previous life, when he was the world's #1, those damn newbies had constantly hassled him with questions about whether he could teach them some tricks to get stronger, whether he had any tricks for raising their player skills, and so on. It was seriously depressing, with people wanting to ask the world's #1 for shortcuts that would let them breeze through everything. He had incredibly unpleasant memories of their most obvious and extremely selfish motive. And yet, so what? In the end, he was hearing the term tricks being used again after arriving in this world. Surprisingly, it did not sound the slightest bit unpleasant. Sylvia thought it would cause her trouble if she could not acquire these skills within 2 weeks, so she was swallowing her pride and asking him for some trick. Seeing that consideration was truly pleasing to him. This was different from some casual human relationship over the internet. This was a truly intimate exchange, a world of difference from his previous life. Far from being unpleasant, he was actually glad that she was relying on him. Second suddenly moved closer to her and changed his plans. He had intended for them to do this separately that day, but he decided to teach her instead. Sylvia blushed when their shoulders lightly bumped. Filled with a feeling he was experiencing for the first time in his life, the genuine delight of teaching something to another person, Second sat beside Sylvia, who looked remorseful yet happy. Sylvia's face flushed red as they sat close together. Second began teaching her, and after some time had passed, he decided they would stop there for the day. Second reflected that, unfortunately, he had taken a serious look at the contents of the grimoires for the first time, and they were absolutely wordy and difficult to understand. Rather than reading books like these, studying something more practical would be 10,000 times better. For Sylvia, he explained as many memorable pointers as possible, similar to those they would find on Wikia, such as what kind of magical effect each spell had, how they should use them, how fire power was calculated, and the changes and cooldowns at each rank. During the lesson, Sylvia wondered whether she was supposed to memorize all of it. Second confirmed that she was. Thinking about it, this was the only kind of stuff he had ever bothered to study. Yet this knowledge about Mabayon was something he had studied more than anyone else. Knowledge that was not the slightest bit useful in real life had now become a more powerful weapon than anything else. He could not be anything but happy about that. Second asked whether she had managed to learn them. Sylvia shook her head and apologized, saying that she wanted to look at them a little longer. Second understood and told her not to fret over it. He then suggested that they head back. On their way back, a girl suddenly exclaimed and hurried toward them, praising Second for being so handsome. Second stopped, faced her, and asked whether she was talking about him. The girl pointed straight at him and confirmed that she was. She then introduced herself as Eco Leaflet and asked for his name. Eco Leaflet. Second recognized the name in his thoughts, realizing that she was the one they had been talking about earlier. He told her his name was Second. Eco repeated his name in surprise before peeking from behind him and asking about Sylvia. Sylvia introduced herself politely and said that she was pleased to meet her. Eco happily returned the greeting, grabbing Sylvia's hand and shaking it. Second could not help thinking that such an adorable pet, no, such a seemingly harmless girl, was being bullied. It was outrageous and unforgivable. He then asked Eco whether she was troubled by anything. Eco paused for a moment before answering that she was not really troubled by anything. Second noted in his thoughts that her answer was not really, then told her that if anything troubling ever came up, she should tell him and he would somehow help her out. Eco brightened and eagerly asked whether he really meant it, thanking him excitedly. Second then noticed the pile of things behind her, and asked about all the books. Eco repeated the question before cheerfully explaining that everyone had asked her to bring them. Second understood, realizing that this meant she was a gopher. Second asked whether she could handle all of it alone. Eco proudly assured him that she was fine and quite strong. Second flatly responded that, since he was going out of his way anyway, she should allow him to help her. Eco looked surprised and wondered whether he was sure. Second confirmed that he was, adding that he was going to personally help her out and that such an occurrence was rare, so she should be honored. Eco stared at him for a moment before smiling and thanking him, but she said that she would do it herself. Second wondered why. Eco explained that this sort of thing was all she was good for, so she was trying her best to help everyone. She believed that everyone would treat her kindly once she became much more helpful. Hearing that, Second froze in place, his eyes filling with rage as his fist tightened. He wanted Eco to stop. Eco then waved brightly at them and forcefully pushed the cart full of books forward. As he watched her leave, Second's expression darkened. He thought about those honest and desperate gears of effort that would never connect no matter how much they spun. He remembered the root of that pain. It was pointless. Even if he played online games, they would not result in anything. Even when he tried harder than anyone else and became the world's #1, at the end of the day, it was just an online game. Risking one's life for something like that was nothing but pointless. Yeah, it was pointless. He wondered how pointless and vain his efforts had been, how idiotic, trash, worthless, and hopeless of a human being he was. As he contemplated those things over and over, he eventually died in shame. Then he arrived in this world, which was a total miracle. They called it a blessing from the gods. A totally hopeless guy like him had, for some reason, been miraculously saved. However, he wondered whether a miracle would really happen for Eco as well. He painfully resonated with her feelings. That was exactly why, now that he had realized it, he wanted to save her with these hands of his more than anyone else. Sylvia interrupted his thoughts, causing him to snap back to reality. Later that night, in his room, Second continued wondering whether Eco was really incompetent. Assuming that she was, he could not understand how she could attend the prestigious Royal Academy of Magic despite being incompetent. He was curious. It was an elite academy renowned even in the kingdom, and managing to enroll meant that a person possessed knowledge of magic. Students should be able to use numerous kinds of magic. After pondering over many things throughout the entire night, Second arrived at only one conclusion. He told Sylvia that he thought they should recruit Eco Leaflet. In an instant, Sylvia's face brightened. She expressed that there was nothing more pleasing than having her path aligned with his and his with hers, adding that she was a lucky person. Second quickly cut her off, asking her not to suddenly kneel and act like a knight early in the morning. Sylvia still did not know whether Iko would accept. Second told her that, if Iko did not, he would at least get her to show him her status so that he could give her some advice on what she should take. Sylvia nodded in agreement. However, the commotion in front of them made them stop. It was Iko Leaflet kneeling on the ground while covered in dirt. Both Second's and Sylvia's eyes widened at the scene before them. Sylvia quickly went to Iko, concerned about what was wrong and what had happened. Meanwhile, Second had an extremely bad feeling that something was clearly off. None of the students walking by were reaching out to Iko. They passed straight by, pretending not to see her and ignoring her. He deeply felt an indescribable hostility. Second called out to Iko, asking what was wrong, whether she was okay, and whether she had fallen down. Iko brushed his hand away and shouted that she was fine and that he should not talk to her. Second froze. He knew this. This was the worst of all evils, the scent he had once smelled before, the scent of despair. Iko suddenly sprang to her feet and ran off, desperately trying to get away from them. Sylvia and Second chased after her anyway. As he ran, Second reflected that he did not know exactly what had happened to Iko, but he understood one thing clearly, and Iko had realized it as well. Her efforts were futile. Earlier, Iko had been carrying sacks and stacking them up when one of the nearby men snickered at how she was going out of her way to bring them the mud that was going to be dumped on her. Another remarked that she truly was a dunce. Iko paused with a puzzled expression, and just then, a lump of mud struck her, covering her body in dirt. The men burst into laughter. Iko was forced to hopelessly face a reality she had always turned a blind eye to until now, where nothing would change even if she continued lying to herself about these futile efforts. She could not go on. It was simply too sad to see. Everyone should have dreams. Iko's eyes froze. Meanwhile, Second, who had been following her, decided that they should save her. Iko continued running away. Sylvia finally caught up to her, but Iko slapped her hands away. Second kept chasing after her, following until they finally cornered her. Iko cried out nervously as she stared at them and tried to keep them away. Watching her, Second reflected that at least an hour had passed. Sylvia was finally burned out, but Iko still somehow seemed to have some SP left. Sylvia reassured Iko that everything was all right and that they only wanted to talk. Iko refused and wanted them to go away and leave her alone. Tears suddenly streamed down her face. Seeing that, Second could not help thinking that leaving her alone like this would be even more futile. She was on the losing side. Iko fell silent as Second recalled how she had been running earlier and had shoved Sylvia away so forcefully. He continued analyzing her, noting that Iko was slow but powerful. She had a lot of stamina points, and chances were that she had low sorcery attack power, or INT. He realized it was a gamble, a huge gamble, but it was worth a shot. Second picked up his sword and warned Sylvia not to be startled. As he stepped closer to Iko, she cried out again for him to stay away. Second raised the sword. Sylvia stared at him in shock. Iko was also stunned and confused, unable to understand what Second Dano was doing. Her words stopped abruptly when Second cut off his own arm with the sword without hesitation. Sylvia and Iko froze in horror. Second clenched his teeth as he endured the pain from his severed arm. Sylvia rushed toward him and scolded him for being a fool, but Second ordered her to stay back. Sylvia had no choice but to stop. Second held out the wand in his remaining hand. In his thoughts, he reasoned that if he could recruit Iko to his party here, he would surely move closer to becoming the world's #1. He handed the wand to Iko and told her she was suited for recovery sorcery, then instructed her to use the wand and heal his arm. In his mind, Second concluded that Iko must be a paladin. Iko stared at him speechlessly before shaking her head and crying that she could not do it. The wand in Second's hand was the Recovery Sorcery Wand Med, an extremely rare wand by Holy Slimes that allowed anyone to use the recovery sorcery called Recovery Med as long as they equipped it. If Iko's growth type was Paladin, then the ++ bonus effect limited to healer growth types would activate. It should result in a recovery capacity powerful enough to restore his arm instantaneously. Second looked down at his arm and groaned from the pain, urging Iko to hurry and do it. Iko looked startled but shook her head again in hesitation. Second raised his voice, insisting that there were no excuses and that she could do it. He urged her to hurry. Realizing she had no other choice, Iko accepted the wand and quietly agreed. In his thoughts, Second encouraged her, certain that this was right. She needed to do it. She needed to believe she could help and realize that this was her way out. Without wasting another moment, tears still in her eyes, Iko raised the wand and pointed it toward Second's severed arm. The wand suddenly shone brightly as Iko cried out for it to heal. In the next instant, Second's arm regenerated completely. Second looked down at his arm and murmured that it was back to normal. Iko's knees gave out as she stared at his arm in shock. Just then, Second's body wavered and collapsed to the ground. He faintly apologized for being unable to hold on before losing consciousness. Sylvia rushed to his side in alarm. In his fading thoughts, Second realized that in this world, even if HP or injuries were healed, the body's physical condition did not return to normal quickly. He reflected on Iko's growth type, which he had realized while chasing after her. She was slow, powerful, had a lot of SP, and was a dunce in a magic academy. That meant she had an insanely low INT. They could not imagine her as a sorceress at all, and those factors perfectly matched the traits of a paladin. Because her INT was low, she was not suited for sorcery, and because her DX was too low, she was not suited for archery. Her STR was decent, but her AGI was low, so she could not really maneuver. Even though her INT was low, she had a ton of MP. Looking only at those factors, she seemed completely hopeless. However, some of the high rankers willingly chose this growth type. That was precisely why, whenever a team became famous, it definitely had a paladin as one of its members. Paladins were tanks because they leveraged their high HP, SP, and VIT to utilize shield art. They became walls for their comrades, single-handedly soaking up damage from monsters, and as soon as they suffered damage, they personally used recovery sorcery to restore their own HP. In other words, they could remain standing as a wall until they ran out of MP. If Second could turn a paladin like Iko into a comrade, he could form a team consisting of Paladin Iko, himself as the all-rounder, and the magic archer Sylvia, giving him an advance, middle, and rear guard with complete satisfaction. He would greatly close in on becoming the world's #1 and would be able to aim even higher. Second wanted Iko no matter what. That was what came to his mind. Second was trying to make use of Iko, hoping to get her to become his ally because he was certain she would be useful if she knew recovery sorcery. Thinking back, he realized he had done the same thing with Sylvia before. He had taken advantage of an emptiness in her heart and somewhat forcefully persuaded her. He had gone overboard to attract her sympathy, somehow drawing her toward him and making her join him. Even so, he genuinely wanted her to follow him, and he quietly pleaded for her to do so. Slowly, Second woke up and found himself inside the room. Sylvia rushed to his side in relief, telling him not to go overboard and reminding him that if he lost that hand, he would not be able to become the world's #1. Second called out to Sylvia and explained that it was difficult to say, but it had been his left hand, not that one. Sylvia's face instantly flushed with embarrassment. She quickly let go of his hand and released a heavy sigh before remarking that he had quite the nightmare. Second stayed quiet for a moment before giving a small smile and casually brushing it off as nothing worth worrying about. Sylvia repeated his reassurance that there was no need to worry about him, then pointed out that it should have been her line. She reminded him that both she and Iko had been saved by him, and by no one else. They had been rescued by Second Dano. She had been in a completely hopeless situation, yet Second Dano had saved her from it so easily. Because of that, there was no need for him to worry about anything. She would become his knight and follow him to the ends of the earth. Sylvia smiled softly before leaving the room. Second sat up on his bed, wondering whether she had heard him sleep-talking. But no, he was sure that was not all. Chances were that Sylvia had completely seen through him from the very beginning. Even his attempts to take advantage of her weakness and use her, along with the uneasy feelings he sometimes had about it and everything else, had apparently been seen through by her. Yet she had taken it upon herself to say that she would follow him. She was a good girl. Just then, the door slammed open, startling Second. Someone burst inside while calling his name loudly. Second turned toward the door and saw Iko standing there. She rushed straight to his side and hugged him tightly, repeatedly apologizing. Second gently patted her head and told Iko once again that recovery sorcery was suited for her. He urged her to quit school and join him. In his thoughts, Second recognized this as the best opportunity to ask Iko in order to take advantage of her, and he had faith that it would be her salvation. Iko brightly wondered whether she could be helpful to him. Second smiled and affirmed that she could, deciding that they should travel together. Suddenly, Iko's bright expression fell as she hesitated. Seeing that, Second asked whether there was some reason she could not quit school. Iko looked at him in surprise, wondering how he had known. Second merely grinned and reminded her that he was the world's #1. He then encouraged her to try telling him. Iko clenched her fist tightly as she began explaining. She started telling him everything about herself. From what she told him, it seemed that she had been born in a beastfolk village far away from the royal capital. Iko had possessed a stupidly high amount of MP ever since she was a child, and her father had boasted about it everywhere. The villagers had begun to place their hopes in her, wondering whether Iko might be talented in sorcery after all. The story spread wider and wider until, last year, all the villagers pooled together their gold and enrolled Iko at the prestigious Royal Academy of Magic. She was a prodigy from a countryside beastfolk village, and they foolishly believed that if Iko could become a prominent sorceress, it would help with the village's development. Iko had passed the entrance exam because of her growth type, in which only her INT was abnormally low. She had no problems at all learning skills or improving her knowledge of sorcery. Rather, she was superior at it. She had also already learned the raptor form and the wind and earth element. However, because her INT was abysmally low, her might was not even half that of the other students there. As a result, she was considered a loser. That was why Iko could not quit. She could not betray all of her villagers' expectations. After hearing her story, Second could not help but wonder what those expectations had produced for her. They had only placed a massive weight upon her, weighing down the heart of a lone girl and continuing to crush her even now. Second assured her that everything was all right because he had prepared an escape route for her. Iko gave him a puzzled look. Second explained that she could escape, and that she was lucky to have a good escape route right there. In his thoughts, Second noted that this was different from his time. Iko repeated the idea of having a good escape route, and Second confirmed it, assuring her once again not to worry. He intended to become the world's number one. The world's number one. Iko looked at him, clearly having no idea what he meant by being the world's number one. Second explained that it meant being the best in the world, with not a single person stronger than him, and that she would be one of his team members. There could be nothing more prestigious than that. The Royal Academy of Magic was no more than snot, and becoming a sorceress of the royal court was trivial. Second was certain that the villagers would be pleased too. No, they would be elated after holding a festival for 3 days and 3 nights straight. They would erect a bronze statue of Iko in the dead center of the village and continue spreading tales about her for all eternity. It would be legendary glory. When Iko returned to her village, she would be so eminent that everyone who met her would definitely prostrate themselves and cry before her. Hearing that, Iko could not help but burst into laughter. Second adopted a dramatic tone and imagined Iko-sama returning in glory. That was what the village chief would say first. Her father would probably ask Iko to get Second-sama's autograph for him. Watching Second imitate everyone so seriously, Iko burst into laughter again. Tears welled up in her eyes as she laughed. Seeing that she had finally relaxed, Second smiled quietly. After a moment, Iko called out to him and decided that she would go with him. Second smiled at her answer. And just like that, the paladin beastfolk Iko leaflet became an ally. Second instructed Iko to withdraw from her studies starting that day and obtain permission to enroll in Class A as his attendant. Iko immediately understood. The 3 of them then went together to the headmaster's office. Paula, the headmaster, asked them to give her a little time. Second agreed and asked how long they should wait. Paula explained that she would hold an emergency staff meeting at lunch and that they would make a decision afterward. Second said he would look forward to good news and took his leave. The 3 of them then exited the office. Once they were outside, Sylvia asked Second why he had done something like that. Second admitted that he did have the feeling he was being unrealistic, but there was a good chance his request would go through. Sylvia wondered why. Second explained that they were exchange students, while he was a noble from a foreign country whose eyes had witnessed bullying, particularly toward beastfolk. Sylvia muttered that she understood, considering that if Zipong was a country that treated beastfolk with hospitality, then this would be seen as a problem. Second finished her thought, explaining that even if they did not consider it a problem, it still gave off an extremely poor impression. Furthermore, the staff were stuck in a situation where they could do nothing even if someone pointed out that they were turning a blind eye to all the bullying. They would not want any more problems to occur, and everyone would want to conclude the matter as amicably as possible. Therefore, it was only natural that his request would pass. Hearing that, Iko gasped in amazement at how smart Second was. With a smug expression, Second attributed it to being the world's number one. Afterward, they headed to the cafeteria. Just then, Maine spotted them and approached Second, having already heard about the matter and realizing that Second was making Iko his attendant. Second furrowed his brow, wondering how Maine already knew. It seemed the rumors had spread in just half a day. Second patted Iko's head and praised her as an excellent recovery sorceress, adding that being unable to see that clearly showed the nature of the school. Maine burst into laughter at his blunt words, remarking that Second Dano was the same as always and expressing his genuine fondness for Second's straightforward personality. At the mention of genuine fondness, Second gave Maine a strange look and began to wonder whether Maine really meant it in that sense. Before he could finish the thought, however, Sylvia smacked him on the back and firmly warned him against it. Iko was left completely confused, while Maine simply watched them with an innocent smile. Just then, Professor Kevin arrived and greeted them. Second immediately asked about the verdict. Kevin informed him that it had been approved without complaint. Iko-san would stay with him in Class A starting that day as Second Dano's attendant. Second expressed his relief at hearing the news. Kevin then excused himself and left. Second thought that Professor Kevin was sharp enough not to ask questions such as why Iko needed to be an attendant or why she was being placed in Class A. If he had asked, Second could have sarcastically bombarded him with an answer about preventing Iko from being bullied again. Sylvia then asked in surprise why Second had put Iko into Class A. Second secretly reminded himself that he had a female knight here who was a numbskull. Iko asked the same question, wondering why. In his thoughts, Second admitted that saying it was to keep her from being bullied again would have been the easy answer, but the truth was different. He had briefly considered taking revenge on the masses who had bullied Iko, but Iko herself had not wanted that. She had simply wanted to be with him. Sylvia and Iko both stared at Second, waiting for an answer. After thinking for a moment, he finally explained that it was because Iko was his comrade. After their meal, they headed to the library. Second noted that they were in the library now and that the remaining exchange student period was limited. He needed to get Sylvia to learn sorcery quickly. 1 week passed. Perhaps his kind, careful, and thorough lectures had borne fruit, because Sylvia acquired the fire element raptor form of sorcery in just 3 days. Moreover, Second thought that Sylvia had grasped some sort of trick. She even exclaimed that she strangely felt as though she could perform the coral form. After that, they ended up borrowing all 4 elements of the coral form from the librarian. Since it was a chance to acquire them, Second decided to acquire all of them as well. Sylvia also seemed to be trying quite hard, repeatedly mumbling that she only needed a little more. She remained planted in her seat, confined to the library as if possessed by something. After that, Second had already taught Sylvia everything she should know, so that period was fairly relaxing. While they were enjoying themselves by lying on the grass, Maine arrived and joined them. That was how they spent the rest of those comfortable days. At a glance, it seemed that Second was not doing much, but the truth was that he had an objective: getting on Maine's good side. He seemed to already be fulfilling that objective, but he still felt that he was not quite there yet. The reason he wanted to get on Maine's side was the 4th form grimoires. Second was certain that Maine had said the 4th form was located inside the royal palace. In the first-rank dungeon Algin, the grimoires for every element of the 4th form each had a roughly 10% drop rate from the boss. It was the simplest dungeon among all the first ranks, and presently, Sylvia, Iko, and Second would have no difficulty exploring Algin dungeon. Thus, he had been trying to get closer to Maine so that they could establish a relationship where Second could ask Maine to bring him to the royal palace. At that moment, Iko held up a document and asked what it was. Second turned toward her and realized belatedly that Iko was not very literate. More precisely, she had trouble with the common Japanese used in this world. Come to think of it, back when he had been in Mabayan, aside from the important NPCs, the beastfolk had spoken in their beastfolk language. That meant Iko had specifically learned Japanese in order to attend this school. Despite the handicap of having to read grimoires while using a dictionary, Iko had surprisingly managed to acquire the raptor form of the wind and earth elements. Since her INT was low, however, she could not use them at all. If anything, although she looked like an idiot, she might actually have been extremely intelligent. Second quickly brushed the thought aside and decided it was probably his imagination. He told Iko to let him see the document. She happily handed it over. Second read the headline, which announced that the 51st Sorcery Convention was accepting entrants. It appeared to be a sorcery convention held every year, and the winner would also receive a prize. Iko asked about the prize. Second scanned the poster and suddenly froze in shock when he saw that the reward was the chase ring. He read it again to make sure. His body began trembling with excitement. He then looked at Iko and declared that they were going to the sorcery convention, his eyes burning with determination. The chase ring, despite its tacky name, was an extremely powerful accessory. Its effect gave the user a 10% chance of performing an extra attack after casting sorcery. In other words, it had a double attack effect. The effect itself was simple, but it provided a hefty blessing. Second noted that anyone who thought the effect was not particularly impressive was mistaken. The truth was that the accessory could be upgraded by 3 levels. If they befriended a high-ranking blacksmith capable of performing ability upgrades on equipment, the chase ring would evolve and provide a monstrous ability. Specifically, after being upgraded by 3 levels, the chance of an extra attack would rise from 10% to 25%. However, there was no way an item with such a powerful hidden ability could be common. During the Mabayan days, it cost 1.5 billion CL. In this world, Second had no idea exactly how much it would cost. Regardless, he had to get his hands on it here, no matter what means he had to use. Fortunately, the sorcery convention would begin on the last day of their exchange program. As a foreigner who found grimoires rather curious, Second knew that some people would become awfully suspicious of him once he went all out using the raptor and coral forms. Still, as long as they quickly turned tail and ran, they would be able to manage. When the day before the sorcery convention arrived, Second asked Maine whether he was going to attend. Maine explained that, as the second prince, he had to participate and then asked whether Second-san was going to attend as well. Second confirmed that he was, causing Sylvia to burst her drink out of her mouth in surprise. She immediately pointed out that she had never heard about that. Second remarked on her reaction and explained that it was because he had never mentioned it. Maine sighed heavily. Seeing that, Second asked whether there was something he disliked about the sorcery convention. Main explained that his older brother would be there the following day. Second narrowed his eyes at Main and realized that he meant the first prince. He bluntly wondered whether Main disliked him. Main quickly clarified that this was not what he meant. He simply was not very good with his brother. His older brother was a talent supremacist, and because Main only had talent in sorcery, his older brother, whose forte was swordsmanship, called him a weakling and looked down on him immensely. Furthermore, even without intending to, his older brother saw them as rivals fighting for the crown and therefore considered Main a threat. Although his brother was visiting the following day to spectate as the commander of the First Chivalric Order, Main was certain that his brother's real motive was to denounce him in front of the masses. Hearing that, Second realized that the first prince was the commander of the First Chivalric Order. The first prince certainly sounded like a bad person. Second glanced at Sylvia, who was sitting in silence. He understood now. That first prince was one of the corrupt scumbags from the upper echelons of the chivalric order who had harassed Sylvia. That would mean the first prince was the highest among them. Second then asked Main whether he could simply skip the sorcery convention by pretending to be sick or something. Main shook his head and explained that his older brother would simply use his absence to portray him as a weak and stupid younger brother who, despite attending an academy of magic, was too cowardly to even show up at a sorcery convention. Second could not help thinking that being a prince was painful. Sylvia suddenly brought up another matter and addressed Second Dano. Second asked what was wrong. Sylvia informed him that she had acquired the Coeurl form that morning. Second was surprised that she had acquired it that morning and that he had never heard about it. Sylvia smirked and explained that she had never mentioned it. Second was taken aback, realizing that she had thrown his own words back at him. Meanwhile, Iko remained busy eating her food. On the day of the sorcery convention, Second sat in his seat with a serious expression. A man nearby remarked that although there was a ring prize, he had never heard of it before. Another pointed out that the previous year had marked its 50th anniversary, yet it did not seem like a big deal. Another added that the number of participants had been decreasing and the rules had been revised, so the convention was declining. While listening to them, Second could not help thinking that although these men were aspiring sorcerers, they did not know the worth of the chase ring. Without any upgrades, it was understandable to think that a 10% chance of an extra attack was insignificant, but there was no way they would not know about ability upgrades. One of the men mentioned that he had heard His Highness Klaus would spectate that year. Another smirked and considered it obvious, given that Class A was participating. The first man understood that he meant the second prince. He then added that there were rumors that the two princes were not on good terms. Someone wondered how that had happened. Another brought up the first prince beating the second prince while calling it an exhibition. A third man burst into laughter and considered the first prince rather cool. Hearing that, Second thought that no matter where they went in this academy, the image of the first prince versus the second prince was always being painted. It was rather unnatural, and he could not imagine that the main reason lay with Main himself. There was a huge possibility that the first prince was manipulating their reputation. Second wondered whether this Klaus guy hated Main that much. Just then, Main arrived, causing the men from earlier to immediately shut their mouth. Main approached Second, who asked whether he was going to be a seed. Main's face lit up when he spotted Second and he confirmed that he was going to start in the semifinals. Second realized that meant he would not encounter Main until the finals. Main chuckled and looked forward to meeting Second there. The sorcery convention was being held in a tournament format with a total of 7 participants. Main was positioned at the left end while Second was at the right. Main only needed to win once to reach the finals, whereas Second needed to win twice. There was, however, one thing Second did not know. He called out to Main and asked what they did in a sorcery convention. The men nearby collapsed from their seats upon hearing the question. Main was shocked that Second had signed up without knowing something like that. Second casually apologized and guessed that they were probably killing each other using sorcery. Main immediately rejected the idea. Second then guessed that they were killing each other normally instead. Main reacted even more strongly, pointing out that such a competition was supposed to involve sorcery. Main sighed deeply and explained that the sorcery convention was conducted with a competition crown, so it had nothing to do with taking lives. The competition crown was primarily used in PvP and was a useful item that allowed participants to engage in PvP with absolutely no risk. The usage and skill limitations of every piece of equipment and other such matters had rules established for them in detail. There was no risk because everything that happened inside a competition using a competition crown was virtual. The participants' own HP and MP were virtualized, and the damage they dealt and received was virtual as well. Originally, in a PvP duel using a dual crown, the battle was conducted in reality with both parties' flesh and blood, so people naturally died when their HP reached 0. With a competition crown, however, everything was virtual. Even if a participant's HP reached 0, The competition simply ended and everything returned to normal without any issues. Because of that, players had called it something meant for chickens. However, some curious gamers had been fascinated by the freedom provided by the rules established by the competition crown. They explored all kinds of variations, invented interesting competitions that were completely different from typical duels, and popularized them. For this particular competition, Main explained that the attacks had to be performed with sorcery. That was the sole rule this time. He made sure Second understood. After hearing Main's explanation, Second became confident about the situation. In his thoughts, he concluded that it was a shitty-ass game. Moments later, Second's time to fight arrived. A man stood at the center and announced the third match between first-year Class A's Second and first-year Class F's Dean. Second stared at his opponent. Just then, Iko's loud cheering reached his ears. Iko waved her hands and accidentally hit Sylvia. Iko turned toward Sylvia, completely unaware of what she had done. The referee then announced the activation of the competition crown. The stage contained a circle with a radius of 50 meters that served as their competition arena. Leaving the arena would result in defeat. The referee raised his hand and declared the two participants ready, beginning the match. The referee declared the start of the battle. Dean, who was Second's opponent, immediately began casting a spell while Second remained standing calmly. From the color and formation of the sorcery, Second could tell that Dean was using the raptor form of wind. Second considered him an idiot. The Opio form was an ordinary attack, the raptor form was a spread strike, the coral form was a powerful solo strike, the fourth form was a powerful spread strike, and the fifth form was an extremely powerful spread strike. Their respective cast times grew longer in that order. Opio, coral, raptor, fourth, and fifth. If a specific attack struck them during casting, the casting would be broken. Therefore, in a competition, sorcery with a cast time of the raptor form or longer was pointless. This was common sense. Second wondered whether Dean Kuan was trying to fool around with him like that. Perhaps Dean had heard some rumor somewhere that Second could not even use sorcery decently. Second felt irritated at the thought that this punk had really made light of the world's number one. He smirked and told Dean to prepare himself. Then he stepped forward, raised his hand and cast the Opio form of wind. The wind slowly formed around his hand. At the same moment, Dean cast the raptor form of wind. Wind also began to gather around Dean's hand, but while it was still forming, Second's wind attack struck Dean's spell and caused it to vanish into thin air. Second smirked as he considered the particular trait that occurred when sorcery and sorcery collided. It was a defensive technique that took advantage of that trait to cancel an opponent's attack. The user would take a little damage, but the cooldown after the Opio form compared to the cooldown after the raptor form was at least twice as long, creating an advantage that more than made up for the difference in power. Dean gasped in shock. Second gave Dean the choice between being tortured to death like that or dying shamelessly while begging for his life. At that same moment, Second cast the coral form of fire. Instantly, flames gathered in his hand. Second had the skill at 5th class, so the cast time reduction had been raised by 2 stages, and the attack power was 300% of his converted ante value. Dean broke into a cold sweat and cried out that he was done for. Just then, Second's flame attack shot toward him. Dean watched it nervously, and the moment it hit him, a huge explosion erupted, blasting Dean into the air. His scream echoed across the arena before he crashed down onto the ground. Second cursed inwardly, realizing that he had put in too much power. He had planned to leave about 10% of Dean's HP so that he could toy with him, but the referee who witnessed the scene was stunned, but after finding his voice, he finally announced that the winner was Second. After the competition finished, the grounds returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Second glanced at Dean, who looked at him with horror and had apparently peed himself in fear. Second then turned to his companions and casually indicated that he had won. Iko exclaimed that Second was so strong. Second responded that of course he was, dear eccentric. Sylvia worried that he was overdoing it and asked whether Dean would be okay. Second assured her that it was no big deal, since he would eventually become the world's number one anyway. Besides, they would bid farewell that day because they were going to escape as soon as they snatched the prize. Sylvia understood that, but she still asked him not to overdo it. Second answered that he understood and asked Sylvia whether she thought she was his mom or something. Sylvia repeated the word in shock, still dumbfounded by the thought of being his mom. Iko encouraged Second to do his best, and he agreed. Meanwhile, Sylvia remained stunned, still mumbling about being his mom. Right then, the next match was announced. The referee called out that the second semi-final match was between first-year Class A, Second, and fourth-year Class A, Keith. The winner of this round would advance to the finals to face Main. The referee instructed them to be ready and begin. At once, Keith lunged toward him while Second stood calmly, thinking that this guy was pretty knowledgeable. In a competition that used only sorcery between intermediate students, the outcome was practically decided by who made the first move. If that was the case, fighting primarily with the Opio form, which naturally had the fastest cast time, was the intelligent choice. Immediately, Second cast the Opio form of wind. Keith instantly stopped and did the same. Winds gathered in their hands, and they launched them at each other. Second realized that it would now become a never-ending stalemate. After this, they would simply cast sorcery together, but the spells cast at almost the same time would collide and cancel each other out, returning them to the beginning. This was the flaw in the competition's rules, and one of the reasons he had concluded that this was a shitty-ass game. Second sighed. Certainly, if this had been a match between beginners, reaching a stalemate like this would have been impressive. However, unfortunately for Keith, his opponent was the former world's number one. Keith asked Second to surrender and offered to give him a suitable reward. Second was slightly surprised and asked why. Keith explained that he could not allow Second and His Highness Mane to fight. When Second questioned him again, Keith explained that he intended to have His Highness Mane win, after which Mane would have a friendly competition with His Highness Klaus. Second questioned Keith about why he was telling him something like that. Keith responded that Second did not deserve it and should simply lose. Second then asked whether it was because he would defeat both Mane and the first prince. Keith denied this and explained that only a competition between His Highness Klaus and His Highness Mane would have meaning. Second stared sharply at him, understanding that Keith was bringing politics onto the competition grounds. Keith insisted that they would never reach a resolution at this rate. Second narrowed his eyes, thinking that this Keith fellow seemed to have been hired to help Mane reach the finals. He must have been one of Klaus's underlings. Under the guise of a friendly competition, Klaus would beat Mane up in front of the spectators. The rumors in the waiting room were not necessarily wrong after all. Second was not pleased. What displeased him most was that Keith was trying to negotiate with him during a stalemate like this and had gotten the foolish idea that he could make Second give up. Second asked Keith whether he thought things would go that smoothly. Keith gritted his teeth and shouted that it was futile. At that moment, their wind attacks collided again. Second immediately cast the Opio form of fire, while Keith did the same. Second thought that Keith was rather skilled at countering him, and they certainly would not reach a resolution in this situation. In this situation, at least. A smirk spread across Second's lips. Since this was a good opportunity, he decided to show them all the real deal. Keith gasped and exclaimed in shock. Second summoned his longbow. They must have been wondering how he could do that inside a sorcery-only competition. However, it was already too late. Second told Sylvia to watch carefully. Sylvia watched in surprise as Second released an arrow wrapped in massive flames. Magic archery was another excellent attack that used sorcery, and it was the second reason why this was a shitty game. Magic archery knocked sorcery onto the bow instead, so it did not actually use any arrow. Keith gritted his teeth, unable to find time to dodge the incoming attack. Just like that, the flames engulfed him. Slowly, the fire faded away, and Keith staggered from the damage before quickly stepping back. Second asked whether this was the first prince's goal. Keith was stunned. Seeing that reaction, Second realized that a competition where the only means of attack was sorcery was clearly a shitty game. That was precisely why stalemates could occur. Prince Klaus must have had some sort of technique to break through them. Second was pretty sure Noir-san had said that Noir specialized in swordsmanship. Chances were that Prince Klaus was using magic swordsmanship. As long as Prince Klaus had that trump card in the competition, Prince Klaus would never lose to Mane. Second was sure that Prince Klaus could poke Mane full of holes without any retaliation, just like this competition he was in now. Second remarked that such cowardly tactics should be experienced firsthand so they could realize how foolish they were. He drew the string of his longbow again and cast another spell into it instead of an arrow. In his mind, he organized the combination. First, he would secure the target with Knight Archery, raise their strength with Silver General Archery, and boost the impact with the Coral form of Earth. This was a combination of 3 skills. Second considered how cowardly it was and how they should experience firsthand how foolish such an act was. While Second was casting the spell, Keith immediately decided to run away. Second warned him that running was futile. He released the string and shot it at Keith. Stones of earth struck Keith's body and knocked him down instantly. The referee stood stunned for a moment but quickly recovered and announced that the winner was Second. Meanwhile, the audience stared with wide eyes before suddenly standing up and cheering loudly. Second smiled as he watched the crowd cheering for him. Away from the eyes of the people, Keith apologized to Klaus. Klaus responded that it was fine and that he would need to change his plans now, but it seemed he had found himself a rather pretty gem. Klaus added that chances were that the so-called Second would win. If he could recruit Second, that little brother of his would still be in a predicament. Keith replied that the man was a rather powerful enemy. Klaus questioned whether that man could refuse an invitation from him, the first chivalric order's commander. There was no such possibility. Klaus grinned and added that it was remarkable that an Academy of Magic had someone capable of making combinations of sorcery hiding within it, and he was glad he had attended. That man would serve as an excellent pawn. Keith remained silent. Meanwhile, at the arena, the referee announced that they would now be entering the finals. Main entered the arena and commented on how truly powerful Second was, adding that he had somehow had that sort of hunch. Second confirmed it and apologized for hiding it, then questioned whether Main had his scorn now. Main smiled brightly and replied that there was no way, as he had come to like Second even more. Second told him that, in that case, Main should take him to the royal palace next time because he wanted to read the fourth form. Main agreed, then hesitantly added that he wanted Second to come in exchange. The referee interrupted and announced for the two of them to get ready and begin. Immediately, Main's face turned serious. Second and Main cast the Opio form of wind at the same time. Second considered that it was obvious, but he would not be using magic archery. It would be rude to bend the rules like that against an opponent who could use nothing but sorcery, and besides, it was no fun anyway. Main sharpened his eyes and waited for the right time to launch his attack. Second expected Main to cancel the spell once again and bring them back to square one, but his expectation was immediately defied. Second's eyes widened slightly as he watched Main cancel his own spell cast. A strong wind wrapped around Main when Second's attack struck him. Second realized that Main had forcefully twisted his cast time. Just then, Main cast another spell. Second reflected that while being attacked during casting would interrupt the casting, starting to cast in the midst of being attacked instead would not cause an interruption. Main cast the choral form of wind, and Second immediately countered it. A massive flash burst between them. Second's skill rank was higher than Main's, which meant his cast time was shorter as well. Because of that, even though he cast later, both Main's and his choral forms were invoked at the same time and cancelled each other out. After both attacks vanished into thin air, Main stood there dumbfounded. Second looked at him and realized that this was a look that should never be shown in a PvP. It completely revealed that his trump card had just been used. Second stepped back and reflected that he had made light of Main. He preached to others about never underestimating people, yet he had ended up doing so himself. Main was serious, and if Main came at him seriously, then it was only respectful for Second to do the same. Second decided to execute the ultimate sorcery in Mobius Online with the dignity of the man who had defended the title of Wise General 22 times in a row. He told Main to watch carefully, then cast the choral form of fire. At the same time, Main cast the choral form of wind and shouted that Second shall not pass. Second shot his flames toward Main while recognizing that the attack was just outside its effective range at that distance. That feeling had been ingrained in him through many years of experience, and he did not even need to measure to know. Besides, he had not exactly prepared the choral form as an offensive attack to begin with. Main was stunned when he saw that the flame did not hit him and instead stopped in front of him. Then he noticed Second already moving into his next action. Main's eyes widened in shock as he realized that he could not see any magic circle. Second told him that he could use it like this as well. Second reflected that sorcery was not always offensive and could also be used in this way to hide the next move. For that next move, the raptor form was a spread strike skill with a long cast time, but the effect they could invoke from it was no joke. Main quickly became alarmed when he saw Second casting again. Second commanded the spell to invoke. In an instant, large stones burst from the ground in front of Main, blocking him completely. Main's jaw dropped wide. Second reflected that calling forth a wall to limit his opponent's freedom was also a respectable sorcery tactic. It was the most basic of the basics in a battle of sorcery, and they had nothing to lose by learning it. Now it was time for his finisher. Right away, Second cast the choral form of water. At that instant, unable to dodge it, Main's eyes widened as the attack struck him and knocked him down to the ground. Main sighed disappointedly, but when he felt a presence approaching him, he lifted his head and saw Second. After a short laugh, he admitted that he had lost. Hearing that, Second's face darkened. Meanwhile, the crowd cheered loudly. Second glared at Main and harshly demanded to know why the fuck he was laughing. Main froze, stunned by Second's words. Stunned, Main replied that Second-san was powerful. Second denied this, explaining that if Main's choral form had been at least of the 5th class, he probably would have lost. By constantly being at the brink of defeat, Second had unknowingly made light of Main, and there was not a hint of power in that. Main questioned whether Second really was not powerful. Second's face darkened even more as he angrily demanded whether Main was pissed off. Main had lost to somebody who had looked down on him, so he should be pissed off. Main lowered his eyes and replied that he was not. Second told him not to lie to himself, warning that if Main did not get pissed off there, he would remain that way for the rest of his life. Main fell silent, thinking of the words he should use. Just then, Prince Klaus arrived. He applauded Second and remarked that his perception had been magnificent, adding that it was as they said. His stupid younger brother lacked that spirit, despite Klaus repeatedly telling his younger brother that time and time again. Second glanced at him. Prince Klaus continued by saying that he had caught a glimpse of Second's abilities and found him truly skillful. He was therefore granting Second special permission to join his ranks and study leadership with him. The audience was shocked upon hearing the offer. Meanwhile, Second considered that being under the direct supervision of Klaus, the first prince, would mean securing a position in the upper echelon of the first chivalric order. In addition, when Klaus was crowned the new king, he would be guaranteed an even greater promotion. It was an unbelievable situation, and Second was fully aware of it. However, refusing the invitation would mean declaring to the masses that he was making an enemy out of Klaus, the first prince. There was no way he could refuse. That was what everyone would think, at least for a normal person. Second gave the prince a firm answer by refusing. Everyone was shocked at Second's bold decline of the offer. Prince Klaus gritted his teeth and demanded clarification, but Second repeated that he refused. Prince Klaus's face twisted in anger. Meanwhile, Second considered that it was fine because he had already predicted this. Klaus could no longer beat the crap out of Maine because of him, so Second had figured Klaus would eventually come to him like this and try to recruit him. After all, Klaus was the big boss of that dubious chivalric order. Prince Klaus threateningly demanded whether Second did not want to accept. Second explained that he had made a promise with Maine prior to the match and would go with him to the royal palace afterward. Maine was surprised. Second understood the meaning behind those words. They stated that he was already affiliated with the second prince. He had certainly formed an arrangement with Maine just a few minutes ago, and the referee nearby could serve as a witness to that. Prince Klaus glanced darkly at the referee and firmly asked whether it was true. The referee nervously nodded in response. Prince Klaus gritted his teeth and accepted that a contract had already been made between Maine and Second. Cutting in and soliciting was essentially a public act of attempted headhunting, and even though Klaus was the first prince, doing so was a breach of etiquette. With a tone filled with rage, Prince Klaus said that it was truly unfortunate and that Second should therefore show his devotion to Maine from then on. With that, Prince Klaus immediately left. Maine then called out to Second with his eyes sparkling with admiration. Second considered that Maine was completely forgetting about the lesson he had been teaching him up until then. He decided it was time to continue the lesson and asked whether Maine could keep competing with him until Maine finally got pissed off. Maine gasped in surprise and pleaded for some leniency, insisting that there was no way he could beat Second. Second called him a fool and explained that this was precisely the part of Maine that had to change. That was why Prince Klaus had called Maine his weak-ass, stupid little brother. Maine complained that it was mean and remarked that Second-san was extremely strict with him, practically like his older brother. Second told him not to bunch them together. He gently tapped Maine's head with his fist and added that it was because they were friends, dumbass. Immediately, tears welled up in Maine's eyes. He then smiled brightly and agreed. Meanwhile, on the way to the headmaster's office, Prince Klaus angrily shouted in frustration over that damned Maine. He slammed the door open and called for Paula Memento, demanding to know whether she was there. The headmaster, Paula, stood up and asked His Highness Klaus to calm down. Klaus angrily ordered her to be quiet and demanded that she quickly give him all their information on that sickening wretch named Second. Paula immediately rummaged through her drawer. Klaus demanded that she hand it over, then quickly snatched the document from Paula's hand and scanned the information inside it. He gasped again in anger upon seeing that it was all the information available, questioning whether it only described how Second had spent his time in the academy. Paula explained that Second was a man of rather many mysteries. Even the island nation of Zippong, where he had been born, remained an absolute unknown. Prince Klaus's face contorted with anger. He cursed in frustration, threw the documents aside, and stormed out of the office. Paula was left standing silently. She then picked up the documents that had fallen onto the floor, murmuring that she had heard Prince Klaus was hot-tempered. She supposed that, although, Second Cohen would require her to look deeper into him then. At the start of Chapter 16, after receiving the chase ring as Second's prize for winning, they fled and left the Royal Academy of Magic. With that, Second's sorcery acquisition plan was accomplished for the time being. Second then announced his current objective to the ladies. For the time being, they would focus on gaining experience points in dungeons and continue exploring until Eco, in particular, reached intermediate level. Second figured that, given their current situation, raising the level of their skills should come first above all else. Starting that day, they would concentrate their efforts on exploring dungeons for the next little while. Sylvia asked whether they were going to Royce's dungeon again, and Eco became excited. Second explained that they would not be going to Royce's dungeon this time. Instead, they were going to explore a second-rank dungeon, Limped Fath. Sylvia considered it, while Eco accepted the plan. Second explained that the Limped Fath dungeon did not spawn many monsters, and all of them featured high defense but low offense. It would be good training for their coordination. In addition, its boss, the Rock Tortoise, dropped the Rock Shell Shield, making it perfect for Eco to equip. Sylvia asked Second to explain more about the shield he had mentioned for Eco. Second explained that Eco was suited for the duty of fending off monster attacks on the front lines. He patted Eco's hair and asked whether they should go and improve Eco's shield arts that day. Iko agreed. Sylvia tried to stop Second, but he simply explained that there would be times when Iko would be hurt even if she defended with a shield. To prepare for those moments, they would acquire some recovery sorcery as well. Iko agreed. Sylvia questioned whether Second really planned to have such an innocent young girl stand on the front lines. Second reassured her that it was fine and that Iko would become indomitable in no time. Sylvia clarified that this was not what she meant, but Second proceeded with the plan. They went to the armor store and bought a large shield that was as tall as Iko. There was no armor suitable for Iko's body, so they bought some high-class lesser equipment instead. The entire set came to 4 million CL, which was even more expensive than Second's own gear. Afterward, they stopped by the Grand Royal Library, where Second had Iko learn pawn shield art and spear shield. Second then took Iko to the church to look at the recovery sorcery grimoires. At the church, Second asked to look at the recovery minor grimoire for recovery sorcery. The nun led the way and showed them a book. Iko later read the book and acquired the skill of recovery sorcery, recovery minor. Second then decided that they should leave. Afterward, as they rode horses, Second considered that a 4-hour trip on horseback from the royal capital, followed by another 30 minutes past the farming town Piho, would bring them to Limped Fath Dungeon. They arrived at the farming town Piho, and soon after, the next day, they began exploring the Limped Fath Dungeon. For the first 2 to 3 weeks, they advanced at their own leisure, focusing on Iko's acquisition of shield art skills. Iko easily acquired the shield art skills Second wanted her to learn to start with the exception of Bishop shield art among the 5. The 5 were Pawn, Spear, Knight, Gold General, and Bishop shield arts. Their effects were as follows. Pawn shield art provided standard protection. Spear shield art performed reflect piercing. Knight shield art protected and knocked back. Gold General shield art provided area protection as well as knocked back. Several days passed after that, and around their 10th run, Iko began to clearly distinguish herself as a paladin. At present, Iko was using a shield against a beast that had just attacked. Sylvia shouted in concern, asking whether Iko was all right. Iko herself was surprised, while Sylvia remained confused. Second explained that it was thanks to Iko's shield art. It seemed that Iko's HP and VIT had risen considerably. Sylvia remained concerned by the development. In Second's mind, Iko was gradually growing into a promising tank, and he guessed that it was time for Bishop shield art. Iko turned toward him with a questioning look. Thinking that it was the right time, they progressed toward the boss located at the deepest point of the dungeon. The boss of Limped Fath Dungeon was a massive tortoise monster called Rock Tortoise. It boasted high defense, but it did not have much power. Second explained to Iko that she should cast her skills according to his lead to protect them. Even if they did not make a mistake, it would still take around 15 minutes to defeat it, and if they made a mistake, they would have to do it all over again. He asked Iko whether she could handle it, and Iko confirmed that she could. Iko then walked forward. Second signaled the beginning, and Iko stood in front of the boss. In Second's mind, the condition for acquiring Bishop's shield art was to utilize shield arts to completely block 100 attacks in a row from a boss that was stronger than them. The main bottleneck was the complete part. This basically meant that Iko could not take even a single point of damage, so her means of defending would be limited. She would repel long-range pierce strikes with spear shards. This meant that Iko could not attack with shield arts or keep parrying and knocking the Rock Tortoise back with Knight shield art or Gold General shield art. Parrying was a phenomenon that triggered when someone synchronized with an enemy's attack and defended at the right timing, protecting that person from damage while adding a weak knockback effect. Now that it had come to this, it was essentially a music game, and mastering it was a pain. However, as long as they learned the timing, they would be able to constantly parry to defend, making it possible to battle with an insane advantage. Second coached Iko through the attacks with Knight, Gold General, Knight, and Spear, guiding her in tune with the Rock Tortoise's attacks. The Rock Tortoise attacked relatively simply and casually, but nonetheless, getting the parry timing right at first sight was difficult. Iko was hit. Second and Sylvia were shocked. Second realized that they had been just a bit too slow and asked Iko whether she could get going. Iko turned toward him and confirmed that she could. Iko then used her recovery minor skills. She stepped forward and stood in front of the boss. The boss roared and Iko stared at it. From that point on, they continued facing off against the Rock Tortoise for almost 2 hours. Eventually, Iko acquired Bishop's shield art. At the start of Chapter 17, Second stood by the door and asked Sylvia whether it was about time for her to learn magic archery. Sylvia looked at him and said that, of course, if she could, she wanted to learn it. Second replied that she could, and from that day onward, they would acquire magic archery. Sylvia was glad to hear it. Iko then walked toward him with glittering eyes and asked what about her. Second considered it a good question. He was going to check the condition of Iko's Bishop's shield art at a dungeon that day. Iko would be defeating Rock Tortoises in an attempt to obtain the Rock Shell Shield. Iko became excited and Second smiled at her. Iko had been happy every day lately. Although the girl should have acted like a cat beast, Iko was completely like a dog on the inside. Second then signaled that they would go to the dungeon later. First, Second explained that they would start by fulfilling the condition of combining archery with sorcery. Sylvia acknowledged this. To acquire the combination skill in magic archery, they had to use sorcery to kill 1,000 monsters that had been weakened to at least 25% of their HP using archery. Sylvia should easily meet this quota in about a week. Second then told Iko to try using Bishop's shield art. Iko agreed. The beast approached and Iko raised her shield. As it neared, she used the Bishop's shield art skill. Sylvia was shocked, while Iko was delighted. Bishop's shield art had an effect called Strengthen Defense, which defended while temporarily amplifying one's VIT. If it reached the 9th grade, Iko would be able to defend with 600 of her VIT. For a high VIT character, it was a powerful skill capable of leisurely repelling attacks from boss-class monsters. Second explained that it was an extremely powerful skill, but it drained quite a lot of SP, so Iko should use it only when she truly needed to. Upon learning this, tears fell from Iko's eyes and she cried. Second walked over to her and asked what was wrong. Iko explained through her tears that it was amazing and that she could finally be of use. Second thought that the overwhelming utility of Bishop's shield art had trumped Iko's mysterious heartstrings then. Sylvia raised her bow and announced that she had learned it and acquired the magic archery combination. Looking at the beast, Second decided that they should test it out. Sylvia should try the coral form. Sylvia agreed. She pulled her bow and aimed her arrow at the beast, then paused before asking Second if he was sure. Second assured her that he was and urged her to proceed. She released her arrow with the pawn archery skill 5th grade, coral form of fire 9th class skill, and combination skill. The attack made a hole in the beast. In his mind, Second calculated that the rank of Sylvia's coral form of fire was 9th class, which meant its critical damage was 1612. He supposed that it was just good enough for use. If they converted Sylvia Spawn's archery into the castle or silver general and raised the rank of her coral form, it would become a mainstay backline skill. Second definitely wanted her to try her hardest. Iko praised Sylvia for being amazing, and Sylvia stuttered before acknowledging that it was quite amazing. Later, back at their place, Second suddenly told Sylvia that he wanted to do it. Sylvia was shocked and flustered by the sudden statement and wondered why he had brought it up all of a sudden. Second explained that he wanted to do it at that point in time, but Sylvia's eyes widened as she clearly misunderstood him. Second stopped her and pointed out that it was still a bit early and that they should deepen their relationship or something first. Second then blurted out that he could not help but get stronger. Sylvia focused on the matter of becoming stronger and looked at him menacingly before giving him a slap. Second explained that now that they finally had their hands on this chase ring, they had to get stronger. Sylvia agreed that he was right. Second apologized and explained that this involved her flame wolf's bow as well. That caught Sylvia's attention. Second then turned toward the sleeping Iko and added that, as for Iko and the rock shell shield, Iko would eventually get it too. In Sylvia's mind, Second kept talking even though Iko was asleep. Second decided that whatever the case, Sylvia should listen carefully. Strengthening equipment was insanely important. He then considered how much damage he could dish out with castle archery at that moment. Sylvia thought about it and estimated that it was around 3,000 or so. Second considered the figure and then explained that if she simply strengthened the flame wolf's bow to its final stage, the amount would instead become 12,000. Sylvia was shocked and questioned whether he was serious. Second explained that 3,000 plus the enhancement equaled 12,000, making it 4 times as much. Sylvia acknowledged that it was indeed 4 times. If strengthening was actually that significant, then it was certainly important. Sylvia thought about it before hesitantly bringing up the matter of strengthening. Her voice trailed off, and Second asked whether she had realized something. He understood that she was right in what she was thinking. They would need a blacksmith. Sylvia wondered how Second would manage that. Second explained that there were 4 possibilities. The first was for the 3 of them to form a team and register at the Adventurer Guild, where they would take recruit. Second thought it would be easier to gather personnel as a member of a team taking recruits than as an individual. However, there was no knowing how long it would take before they managed to come across a good blacksmith. Dependable blacksmiths would not necessarily approach them all the time. Sylvia considered that rather difficult. The second option was to search through every single person who seemed to have an aptitude for blacksmithing and invite them. Sylvia thought she would pass out. Second considered that if they were luckily able to find one, there would be plenty of advantages to being able to train someone as a blacksmith. However, the chance of encountering one was less than 1 in 10,000. The third option was to invite an active blacksmith. Sylvia considered this the most realistic option, though she remained hesitant. Second agreed that there were not many prospects, but he thought that blacksmithing was a valuable trade. Telling someone to abandon the place where they were working for people they had never even heard of before was simply unreasonable. Second then moved on to the fourth option, which he considered their likely winner. Sylvia wondered whether he had thought of some good ideas, but she became confused when he remained silent. Second finally blurted out that they would buy a slave. He shielded his face, but no slap arrived. Sylvia understood that it would certainly be easy to find a slave with an aptitude for blacksmithing. Second was surprised that Sylvia was not angry. Sylvia saw no reason for her to be angry. Second was searching for a slave with an aptitude to be a blacksmith, after all, so she considered it a good idea. If it was a slave market, there would not be any issues with browsing through their statuses. Second thought that Sylvia had allowed it because she was the female knight. He had expected her face to turn completely red and for her to object to the idea of Second simply wanting to be violent toward a slave, like in an obscene book, before hitting him, but none of that happened. Second decided that, in that case, they would return to the royal capital tomorrow and visit a slave dealer. Sylvia agreed and then suggested that they should wear that outfit as well. Second recognized that she meant the rare outfit and thought that he would certainly receive better service by looking rich. He acknowledged that it was a good point and decided that they would get it prepared. At the start of Chapter 18, the three of them were now at the royal capital Winston. They went to the Maurice Slave Company, where a man welcomed them and expressed his pleasure at meeting them. He was the company president, Philip. In Second's mind, he was the biggest, hottest middle-aged man around those parts. The influence of these clothes was truly tremendous, after all. Simply wearing them produced incredible result. Second explained that he was looking for a blacksmith slave and asked whether he could look through some statuses so he could thoroughly analyze them. Philip readily agreed and immediately arranged to bring them over. He flicked his finger. Later, while they shared tea, the door opened and the slaves entered. Second completely understood why Sylvia had not gotten angry. That was the misunderstanding. Of course, they were talking about blacksmiths, but hearing the word slave had gotten his hopes up because he had figured they would be young men. Philip asked whether Second had found any slave who was satisfactory. Second asked for a moment to consider them. He found it shocking that all of them were middle-aged men and felt a sense of disappointment that he could not quite put his finger on for the time being. He had each of them show their statuses and sorted them according to the desired qualities for a blacksmith. Everyone wanted STR and DX, followed by LUK, while having someone with INT as well would be nice. The growth type that perfectly fulfilled those conditions was probably the blacksmith, after all. Moreover, they were going to be the blacksmith who upgraded the weapon of someone aiming to become the world's #1. Second would prefer someone with an innately superior status. After giving it some thought, he determined that there was no one among them whom he wanted. Second returned to Philip and explained that none of the men were suitable. Philip apologized and explained that the only others in his possession were criminal slaves. In Second's mind, he could not tell whether there was any difference between criminal slaves and ordinary slaves as long as there was an excellent blacksmith. He did not mind either way. Second then asked Philip to show him those slaves. Philip understood and explained that because they were criminal slaves, he could not bring them there. Second and Philip would have to go to the slave chambers within the company. Second looked at Sylvia and Eco and told them to stay there. Sylvia agreed. As Second went down the stairs, he observed that the Maurice Slave Company seemed to be pretty well off. The slaves appeared to be given a reasonable lifestyle, and there seemed to be only a handful of people who looked as though they were in despair. Philip pointed toward the prison-like area and explained that it was the criminal slave chambers, where 33 inmates were kept. One of them was a blacksmith. Philip led the way. Second saw a collar-chained man and examined him from outside the cell. Second determined that the man would not do. Philip acknowledged this and apologized for being unable to meet Second's expectations. Suddenly, Second noticed something else. One room looked extremely secure. He asked what kind of person was inside. Philip explained that the chamber was the least he could offer as an apology. He opened the peephole, revealing a collar-chained elf woman inside. Philip explained that she was an assassin who had served a duchess who had been executed the other day. The girl slave had been unilaterally bound and forced to assassinate people through her slave contract. As a result, it had been judged that she herself was not guilty of any crime. She had been pardoned from execution and sent to his company instead. Looking at the elf, Second recognized that she was a dark elf. Philip explained that she was a talented woman, but she had been given a no-hostility clause in her contract by the Kingdom of Castal. If Second intended to put her to use, it would probably only be as a sex slave or a maid. As a dark elf, she had not had any takers during these times, which had been greatly troubling. Second wondered about the meaning of no hostility. If it meant that the elf could not attack, then it was a pretty serious restriction. Yet the fact that a dark elf had not received any takers still seemed strange to him. With such a beautiful woman, he imagined that she would have been in huge demand. Philip explained that people constantly complained about the restriction, which had been concerning. Thinking about it, Second realized that there was indeed beastfolk discrimination and dark elf persecution taking place in the Kingdom of Castal. The regulations must have been established as a way to deal with that situation. In other words, during these times, let alone using dark elves as sex slaves, simply having a slave was extremely disgraceful. Second peeked through the small opening and asked the elf girl to show him her status. The elf girl exhaled, and Second could now see her status. The first thing that stood out was her insanely high DX, followed by her fairly high STR and INT. Dark elves were said to be an all-rounder type that specialized in swordsmanship, archery, and sorcery. Her status seemed to be in line with the game's design, but Second wondered why both her LUK and AGI were also fairly high. Second asked the elf what skills she had. She listed swordsmanship, archery sorcery, string manipulation, and assassination. Second now understood that her abnormally high DX would improve not only her sorcery but also string manipulation. Her high AGI was also due to its improvement of her assassination. That meant her growth type could follow the blacksmith's path. Second then asked Philip how much the dark elf cost. Philip was delighted. At that instant, Second made the decision to buy the criminal dark elf slave. She cost 16 million CL. A shiny top-grade blacksmith egg at that price probably meant that this world's doom was already sealed. The price was 16 million CL. Philip then explained that he would set up the slave contract. Second recognized it as a contract used for slave sorcery. He had seen it before in Mob Ion as well. A master and slave bound by a slave sorcery contract could not take a single action that went against the terms recorded in the contract. It was not that something would happen if they broke the contract. Rather, a mysteriously powerful force prevented the contract from being broken in the first place. There were actually plenty of dirty means to break it without penalty, but Second's thoughts were cut short. Philip asked what the terms of the contract would be. Second realized that he had been thinking about so many unimportant things that he had not even read a single line. After reading the contract, he understood everything. In essence, it meant that the master was to treat the slave in a humane way while the slave was to obey the master. The terms were pretty normal, but there was one thing that caught his attention. The very last term written on the contract. Term number 19 stated that B could not make an attack on any kind of human being. Second found that severe. If the girl were assaulted, would that not mean she would have to keep being assaulted without being able to fight back? Second asked whether there was nothing Philip could do about it. Philip explained that because it was an order from the country, it could not be helped. Second accepted that there was no choice and decided to take the contract with those terms. Philip agreed. Later, the elf read the contract, and Philip performed the slave sorcery. Both Second and the slave glowed. Philip announced that the slave sorcery was now complete and thanked Second for his purchase. Second was now being followed by the slave. He asked what her name was. The slave explained that she did not have one. Second then named the slave I do not have one and said that they were heading back to the reception. The slave clarified that she meant that she truly did not have a name. Second grimaced, realizing that his wholehearted gag had not gotten through. Even making a disgusted look despite being a slave, this dark elf was someone with guts. However, the fact that this elf did not have a name made him wonder just what kind of life she had led. Second decided that if it was a test like this, it would be difficult to address the elf, so he asked again whether he could give her a name. The elf readily accepted. Second considered the lack of a name, her status as a dark elf, her delicious chocolate skin, and her violet hair. He thought about it before settling on Yukari. The elf closed her eyes and accepted the name, understanding that her name was now Yukari and that she would be in his kind service. Second smiled. He introduced himself as Second and explained that he would introduce his friends as well later. Yukari accepted. Upon seeing Second, Sylvia asked whether he had found a good blacksmith, then her eyes fell on Yukari. She realized that the beautiful dark elf girl was the blacksmith Second had found. Second confirmed that the elf girl was Yukari and explained that Yukari would begin training as a blacksmith starting that day. Sylvia realized something. A female blacksmith had not been what she expected, and she wondered why she had never considered that possibility. She also noticed that Yukari's breasts were huge. Iko introduced herself to Yukari and expressed her desire for them to get along. Yukari responded that she hoped they would get along well. Iko corrected Yukari's use of the honorific Echo-sama and then accepted being called Echo-san, but immediately corrected that as well, explaining that her name was simply Echo. Yukari finally expressed once more that she hoped they could get along well. Iko had an incredible way of communicating, while Yukari never lost her composure. Second noticed that Yukari was looking at Sylvia. He explained that despite how Sylvia looked, she was actually a splendid magic archer. Yukari showed interest in this, and Second assured her that she would understand eventually. They then headed back to the town of Piho, where they would discuss what to do from there. Second had thought he would be nervous in the beginning, but he was wrong. During their journey to the town of Piho, he tried to deepen his relationship with Yukari by asking her about many things. In the end, however, Yukari simply kept a low profile, and no matter what he asked, she gave cold and extremely dull responses. Even when Second asked about her favorite curry, she replied that she had none in particular. Since Second was not great at socializing in the first place, he quickly gave up. Even though Yukari was a slave, she was a valuable new comrade. If possible, Second wanted them to become more intimate. If they did not have a favorable relationship, then even if Yukari were trained to become a superior blacksmith, she might leave. He wondered what he should do, racked his brain over it, and ultimately arrived at the conclusion that he should simply ask her directly. When they arrived at Piho, Second asked Yukari whether he could question her about her past. Yukari looked at him and asked whether it was an order. Second remained silent for a moment before explaining that if she did not want to answer, she did not have to. Yukari looked at him again and then respectfully refused. She subsequently left the room. Second snickered. He had not expected there to be so much he could gain from her. Yukari had revealed a lot of her emotions through her responses to his questions. He wondered whether what he had seen was caution, agitation, a bluff, or perhaps fear. There was definitely something in her past that explained why she did not talk much and acted like an innocent slave. Moreover, Yukari was afraid of her past becoming known. As Second considered her reasons for hiding her past, he realized something and came to an understanding. It was roughly the same situation he had experienced when he was still the world's #1. He remembered being asked what he would do for a living and felt that he had once picked up emotions similar to those Yukari had shown earlier in response to that question. In his past life, he would always respond that he was in real estate. He had kept it a secret because revealing the truth would shatter the innocent relationship he had with people at the time. If people caught wind that he was unemployed, they would definitely look at him with those kinds of gazes in the future. Out of fear of that, Second would constantly keep his distance from others and put up a front, presenting himself as someone who had plenty of time and money and had simply been pursuing the world's #1 position as a hobby. Yukari did not have such a simple reason though. Still, Second thought she had numerous similarities with him. It was not as though she would accept him simply because he had revealed his own past. Second was sure that she had a similar source of thought as well. If that was the case, then to draw out her true nature, he would need to make her believe that these people would definitely accept her for who she was even after she revealed her past. That would be insanely difficult, but if they did not know what to do, there was nothing they could do besides try. In any case, it was time for dinner, so Second stood up. Later, during dinner, Second proposed that they form a team. Sylvia became excited at finally doing so, and Yukari agreed. Yukari then wondered whether he had said a team. Second realized that he had not yet mentioned their goal. He explained that he was aiming to become the world's #1, while Sylvia and Iko were his allies assisting him. He wanted Yukari to assist him as well. Yukari acknowledged that she was master's slave and would certainly assist with anything she was capable of doing. However, she was surprised that Second had said the world's #1. Second confirmed that he meant the world's #1 and asked whether she knew what that meant. Yukari confirmed that she did. Second made it clear that he was not joking. Yukari simply acknowledged this while closing her eyes and saying nothing. Sylvia then brought up something that had been on her mind for a long time and wondered how Second intended to make his dream of becoming the world's #1 come true. The question caught Second's attention, and he considered it an excellent question from Sylvia. He deliberately used her full name, Virginia, which made Sylvia wonder why he had done so. Second explained that if she was wondering how someone became the world's #1, the answer was simple. Sylvia was confused by how simple he made it sound. Second explained that one needed to acquire every skill title and continue defending them. In other words, they simply needed to win every title fight. In Second's mind, titles were the peak of every skill. Using archery as an example, the primary skill called archery contained 7 kinds of secondary skills ranging from pawn archery to promoted rook archery. To obtain the archery title, they first needed to raise each of those 9 secondary skills to the 9th grade. That was the first condition. The second condition was to attend and win the title fights that occurred twice a year, in summer and winter. Title fights were tournament-style PvP conventions in which those who had fulfilled the first condition participated in hopes of acquiring the titles. After fulfilling the second condition, they were granted the privilege of challenging the current title holder. If they defeated the current title holder, they could publicly take the archery title of Demon Fiends. Other ways to acquire titles were to be the very first person on the server to fulfill the first condition or to defend the title fight against others. Consequently, it was impossible for more than one person to simultaneously hold the same title. The title represented the pinnacle of its skills, making it the ultimate skill status in both name and practice. If they acquired the title in every skill, it would obviously make them the very best. Of course, conquering every title was sufficient enough to earn them the ranking of the world's #1, but Second thought that alone was not enough for them to declare themselves the true world's #1. The world rankings in Mabian considered many other criteria, and the ranks were decided after combining all of them. However, the clear objective they should be aiming for first was, After all, none other than conquering every title. Second asked Sylvia whether she knew about the title fights. Sylvia confirmed that she did and wondered whether Second intended to attend them for every skill. Second explained that since he was going for the world's #1, that was only natural. Sylvia was about to oppose the idea when Yukari stated that it was impossible. Second glanced at Yukari and asked what she had just said. Yukari repeated that she believed it was impossible. Second asked why she thought that. Yukari explained that it was only natural because people could not become that powerful. Second rejected that as a sufficient reason and pressed her to explain why she thought so. Yukari repeated that she had already told him that people could not become that powerful. Second asked what her basis was. Yukari narrowed her gaze and warned Second that he should not speak so frivolously. Second fixed his gaze on her and told her to stop dodging the question. He demanded that she explain the basis for her belief and why they could not become stronger. Yukari questioned why, and Second again asked why she thought people could not become that powerful. Yukari stuttered and repeated that it was only natural. Second asked once more why she thought that. Her eyes became uncertain, and she began to speak before stopping herself. Yukari dismissed it as nothing and asked to be excused. Second allowed her to leave. In his mind, Second wondered what Yukari had been about to say. Considering that Yukari no longer had her assassin status or name, an answer vaguely came to him. Chances were that Yukari had never been raised as a person from childhood. That was how harsh it was to be an assassin. She knew the pain and cruelty of becoming stronger, as well as the difficulty of defeating someone along with its truncheons. That was why Yukari had become angry and called Second frivolous, and he was inclined to agree. If the person Yukari had been speaking to had not been him, that was. Sylvia observed that Yukari was dangerous. Second agreed completely. Yukari was mentally unstable. Considering how Yukari had been locked up at the slave merchant until he came for her, it was probably only natural that she could still control herself that well. Sylvia thought that there was something Yukari desperately wanted to say but was forcefully keeping to herself. Second asked further about what Sylvia meant by saying that Yukari desperately wanted to say something. Sylvia explained that it was simply how it looked to her and asked what Second thought. Second looked down and explained that he thought Yukari was afraid of her secret becoming known. Sylvia's eyes widened before she closed them and smiled. Second wondered what was wrong. Sylvia assured him that it was nothing and apologized, explaining that she was not making fun of him. It was simply that women sometimes experienced conflicted feelings. Second watched as Sylvia went over to the dozing Iko on the table. She carried Iko on her back, and for the first time since they had met, Second felt that Sylvia looked cool. Then he caught sight of something. A paper napkin had become stuck to Sylvia's ass as she left, and Second could not help but reconsider his impression. At the start of Chapter 20, they were at the third-class dungeon Asiasparn. Second wondered why they were in a third-class dungeon at this point in time. It was for the sake of forming a team. To form a team, they needed to fulfill a team formation quest. The requirements were simple. With at least 3 members, they had to form a team by clearing a third-class dungeon within 2 hours. Any third-class dungeon would work, making it an incredibly simple quest. Second had not gone through third-class dungeons in a long time, and among them, he had only entered Asiasparn dungeon once, a very long time ago. At this time, he had completely forgotten Asiasparn's nickname, Blow-Away Dungeon. In front of them were goblins. The goblins noticed them, and Sylvia was shocked to see them. As the goblins approached, Sylvia quickly used her magic archery, then leapt upward and used pawn archery oppo form of fire combination. The goblins were burned. Yukari mumbled in understanding, while Sylvia exclaimed that it was a piece of cake. Second naturally thought that it was simply because this was a third-class dungeon. Iko ran forward and also exclaimed that it was a piece of cake as she went toward the goblins. Yukari questioned whether that was all right. Second acknowledged that it was a justified question, but he believed Yukari should simply watch. Iko fought the goblins and used her general shieldsmanship. Iko's shield struck all 4 goblins, knocking them to the floor. Yukari could not believe what she was seeing. Second explained that with both the vanguard and the rear guard being highly capable, and with their coordination as well, they could progress like this without any danger. Second thought that at this rate, if they joined in, it would not help with their coordination training. He decided to focus only on watching out for ambushes and guarding Yukari. Later, as they went deeper, Asiasparn's boss appeared, called Goblin KO. It was an enormous monster, but it was slow, had low defense, and was a simple boss. However, 10 goblin mage monsters accompanied it, and they could cast magic. Watching over both the boss and its followers at once was a pain. With their current firepower, they could take down the KO in 2 hits, while 1 hit was enough to defeat a mage, so there was no trouble whatsoever. Iko excitedly approached Second, wanting to know their strategy. Second indicated that there was not really one this time. Iko's eyes sparkled with anticipation, which Second immediately recognized as a bad sign. Iko was looking at him with bloody anticipation and sparkling eyes. Second then instructed Iko to aggro the big one in the dead center, and hold it off using bishop. During that time, Sylvia and Second would finish it off. Iko readily understood the strategy. Second instructed Sylvia to keep doing the usual while Yukari stayed by Second's side. Sylvia understood, and Yukari accepted the arrangement. Second then gave the signal to begin. Yukari ran forward, and the KO swung its weapon down. The weapon slammed into Iko's shield, dealing 3 damage. From a distance, Second praised Iko for her performance. Sylvia pulled her bow and struck one of the mage goblins, finding the situation rather dull. The KO approached Iko again. Second decided that they would hurry and finish it. He used castle archery magic and struck the KO's body. Yukari simply watched Second. Second used a combination of knight archery and silver general archery, firing only 2 shots, and those 2 shots killed the goblin KO. Sylvia had already cleaned up all of the goblin mage followers. Second went to ask Sylvia whether it was over, but he found it strange that the team formation quest had not been fulfilled. From what he recalled, the instant he killed the boss and its followers, the team should have been formed. He cursed as he remembered what had happened. The goblin KO's corpse would vanish after a set amount of time. One of the mage goblins trembled and began spouting something. Second immediately realized that this was bad. The goblin pointed its staff toward Yukari. Second cursed, pushed Yukari behind him, and used the Oppo form of fire. The goblin was burned by the flames. Second was shocked. They were near the beach now, and both he and Yukari were stunned. Second remembered that Asiasparn was the blow-away dungeon. The reason Asiasparn was called that was because of the sorcery called random teleportation, which the goblin mages used when they were about to die. Random teleportation was a sorcery that forcefully teleported a target to a random location 4 kilometers away from its current location. In other words, it forcefully blew the target out of the dungeon to somewhere else. One day on the Mabian Woki, an online encyclopedia famous as the very first resource for conquering Mabian, there was a mission titled Case of Getting Blown Bloody Far Away in Asia. Its details were shocking. Although one would expect random teleportation to send someone only 4 kilometers away, the submitter in the 255 kilometers case had surprisingly been blown off by 255 kilometers. At that instant, the goblin KO's corpse vanished. If a goblin mage invoked random teleportation while touching the corpse, the displacement became anywhere from 4 to 255 kilometers. It was an incredibly strange phenomenon in teleportation-based sorcery. The displacement was determined by the MP lost at that moment, creating a system in which the more MP that was exhausted, the farther the displacement became, since the teleportation destination was unspecified for goblin mages. In the case of random teleportation, if every bit of the goblin KO's MP was added to the teleportation distance, the result would be a 255-kilometer-long teleportation. Second had completely forgotten about this incident because superior players rarely became involved with third-class dungeons that only beginners visited. The beach was calm as they watched the waves. Second then saw something together with Yukari behind him. At the beginning of chapter 21, Second looked around the place. Yukari was shocked, but Second assured her that there was nothing to worry about and that the goblin had simply teleported them away. Yukari was surprised that he had mentioned teleportation, and Second confirmed it. Judging from their location in relation to Asiasparn, they were probably about 255 kilometers away. Yukari stared at Second. In Second's mind, that was simply the truth, and there was nothing they could do about it. Second checked his window system and realized that the team had been formed. In the end, it seemed that the goblin mage had failed after all. No matter how far apart they were, as long as they were team members, the convenient function of open communication was one of the perks of forming a team. Second used telepathy to call out to the others and check whether they could hear him. He soon heard Sylvia shouting and calling him a blasted fool. She wanted to know where he had gone and whether he was okay. Second informed her that they were fine and had simply been displaced far away by teleportation sorcery. They would be heading back and wanted her to wait for them at the town of Peijo. Sylvia understood and assured him that she would be fine. She then wanted to know how long it would take and urged him to hurry back quickly. Second estimated that it would take 6 or 7 days. Since Iko and Sylvia were free during that time, he told them to have fun. Sylvia became confused and was about to say something, but Second ended the exchange by telling her that he would see her later. Back at the beach, Yukari asked Second whether they were really that far away. Second confirmed that they were and saw no point in sugarcoating the truth. In his mind, now that he really thought about it, he was stuck with Yukari for a week. He wanted to use this opportunity to somehow open her heart. Considering that they were on a coast 255 kilometers away from Asiasparn, this had to be the southern coast. If they headed north along the coastline, they should eventually reach a port city called Kula. From Kula, it took almost a day on horseback to reach Peijo. From their current location to Kula, it would take almost 5 days on foot. Behind him, Yukari commented that Second seemed familiar with the area. He asked whether she could believe it, but Yukari clarified that this was not what she meant. Second cut her off and questioned why she was being so cold. Yukari explained that it was simply how she had been born. Second could not respond to that in his mind. Damn Yukari, she did not even try to be tactful. He could no longer bear with her any longer. He had already diverted from the plan. He would have to agitate her and get Yukari to reveal her true feelings. He had no other choice. Second then pointed out that ever since they had met, Yukari had been hiding under a shell. Yukari was confused. Second questioned what she wanted to keep secret so badly that she would hide it to such an extent. Yukari explained that anyone would have one or two things in their past that they desired to keep secret. Second questioned whether that could even be the case in a master-servant relationship. Yukari affirmed that it could. Second then asked whether she intended to continue putting up that act from then on and never reveal her past. Yukari gave an affirmative response. Second understood. This girl was beginning to reveal her true colors. He asked whether she admitted to putting up an act just then. Yukari denied it and explained that she had merely been following along with the conversation. Second recognized that as a slip of the tongue and wondered whether she was nervous. Yukari was about to respond, but she twitched. Second pointed out that the edge of her mouth was twitching. Looking at Yukari, Second could see that his plan was working. Her emotions were gradually swelling up, so it was time to enter the main topic. He told Yukari that it was pointless to keep things that way, because even if she said nothing, they would simply remain silent about it, arbitrarily deciding that and drawing a line between him and her. He questioned whether she intended to stay like that forever. He had caught her attention. Second continued, explaining that, as a rule of thumb, it would probably take a weight off her back if she simply told the truth. In his mind, truthfully speaking, he already had a good idea. He had found out after a bit of investigation the previous night. The Duchess who had been executed, Lucia Icene, was a name Second had heard before. He urged Yukari to be honest and remove the burden she was carrying, since there was no point in keeping it secret. Yukari began to open her mouth and revealed that she was hiding it for somebody else's sake. She became agitated as she spoke of the kindness she and Lucia had shared. Second looked at her without really understanding and felt that, to him, it simply seemed as though Yukari was doing it for herself. Yukari became extremely angry and turned her back on him. Second considered his mission somewhat successful. He had managed to make her show her feelings. He also had a hunch that he might have gone a little too far, but if he had not done this, he would not have been able to tear down Yukari's wall. He had no choice. Meanwhile, in Yukari's mind, Second was a vulgar man who dreamed of becoming the world's #1 and a superficial man who tried to gain her interest by speaking of such an impossibly foolish dream. Someone like that was not suitable to be her master. Second sent the superior female magic archer and the young beast girl to fight on the front lines while he did nothing from behind. A man who went through dungeons that way while seeking to become the world's #1 was nothing but pathetic. The random transportation, the place 255 kilometers away, and the claim that it would take 7 days to reach Peijo were all clearly lies. Second had likely used some dirty tactic to spend time alone with her. Yukari believed that Second had planned to violate her after bringing her to a place where no one else was around. She knew sadly that she could not resist. The thought that she might have to sleep with this man disgusted her. If it reached that point, perhaps she should simply take her own life. Yet she could not possibly throw away the life she had received from Lucia so easily. Her life had been granted by Lucia. One day ended and the next morning arrived. Second had yet to lay a hand on her. On the contrary, it seemed that Second had watched over the camp throughout the entire night. Yukari had remained vigilant throughout the night as well. If this continued, she would eventually reach her limit. By the morning of the third day, the previous night had become a battle against drowsiness. After pulling 2 all-nighters and walking all day, Yukari was aware that her limit was approaching. Second had not laid a hand on her the previous night either. She suspected that he was waiting for the moment when she completely lost consciousness. To Yukari, it was the behavior of a truly cowardly man. As on the previous day, they spent the day strictly arguing along the way. Whenever they began talking, it always ended in an argument. Their master-servant relationship and everything related to it had already vanished somewhere along the way. Yukari had even begun failing to make proper decisions because of her drowsiness and fatigue. From Second's point of view, Yukari's actions had become completely erratic. She was acting abnormally because of her exaggerated caution toward him, perhaps due to fatigue, which had also been gradually worsening. Moreover, after seeing how desperately Yukari was trying to defend herself, Second became convinced that as long as the slave contract existed, he could not assault her. There was no way Yukari did not know that. Which meant that Yukari had been brainwashed. Chances were that it had been done to make her extremely cautious toward her master. The culprit was clearly Duchess Lucia Icene, who possessed the unique skill brainwashing sorcery. Lucia was an NPC famous as the brainwashing granny of Mabian. There was only one way to dispel brainwashing sorcery: the manifestation of powerful emotions when one's life was in danger. In Mobian's story, an NPC who had been brainwashed by Duchess Lucia could only have it cured after witnessing her beloved being killed before her eyes. Such a heavy scene had once occurred. Brainwashing sorcery undeniably felt like a unique skill that had been forcibly prepared just for such a story to develop, but things would be completely different in the real world. Second wondered how complicated this all was. Second now had no choice but to get Yukari to show her true feelings. He noticed that she had finally fallen asleep. He also had to invoke those strong feelings in a life-threatening situation. In his mind, this was too difficult. Second kept wondering what he should do, repeating the thought over and over. Then, in the darkness, someone stabbed a sword into his back. Someone pulled Yukari away, and a group of men appeared. The man holding Yukari laughed at her beauty, while another warned him not to kill the girl. As they walked away, one of the men asked whether Yukari had been tied up. The other confirmed that she had and urged them to hurry back. One of them wondered how much they thought the girl would be worth. The other noted that Yukari was a beauty and estimated that she would be worth a firm 40 million CL on the black market. The other man laughed at the remark. Back at Second's camp, Second lay face down on the ground. He understood that the ones who had attacked them were thieves. Their goal had been Yukari. The men had been hypnotized by the sight of a 40 million treasure like Yukari and had not even bothered to search through his dead body's inventory. The thieves had probably thought Second was already dead and therefore completely ignored him. It was obviously impossible not to die after being pierced through the heart. Second agreed with that. Even though a long sword had pierced through his heart, his build gave him insanely high HP, so not even a fifth of it had been shaved off. Second considered the thieves unforgivable, but he also realized that this was a great opportunity. At the start of chapter 22, Yukari was awake as she was being taken away. Looking at Second, who lay face first on the floor, she could not help but think that he was simply too slow for a man who had boasted about becoming the world's #1. Second had died so easily, and now Yukari would also be treated as a toy, abused as a sex slave, and eventually end up in a cesspool forever. Yukari could only think that this was likely her fate. However, she did not want this. She could not help but reject it. Even that man would have been better. She wondered why she alone had to go through something like this. She did not want it anymore. She did not want it. At that moment, Yukari's eyes widened. She felt something warm against her forehead, and then she remembered everything. She remembered when Lucia had told her that, starting that day, Yukari would become Lucia's shadow. Yukari was to address Lucia with Sama. Yukari had understood, and Lucia had praised her as a good girl. Yukari remembered being a little child while Lucia stroked her head. The many rings on Lucia's hand would catch in her hair and hurt a little. Even so, Yukari had truly liked the warmth of Lucia's hand. Lucia had been her master and her mother figure. Lucia had asked whether Yukari understood. Yukari would need to work and become useful to Lucia if she wanted to remain in the Icene family. That was Yukari's only choice. Yukari had understood, and Lucia had praised her as a good girl. After receiving special assassination training from the shadow troops who followed Lucia, Yukari secretly acted as Lucia's right-hand shadow. She was a woman who was good for nothing but assassination. Then came the final day. Lucia's final words to Yukari were a request for her to show Lucia her forehead for a moment. Yukari had tried to ask what Lucia was going to do, but Lucia had already reached out her hand. She presented it as a good luck charm for Yukari to become happy before touching her forehead. The next instant Yukari lost consciousness. When she came to, everything was over. Lucia had been executed for plotting a rebellion, while her servants and the shadow troop had all been killed. Yukari alone had been taken into the Maurice company as a slave, and her life had been spared. Now, Yukari understood that her life had been saved by Lucia, her master whom she respected. Lucia had been her gentle mother. Yukari opened her eyes and realized something. She now understood that she had been brainwashed. She gagged and coughed out some liquid. One of the thieves reacted with disgust and kicked Yukari. Another warned him not to damage the precious merchandise. The first thief dismissed the concern because the damage was only to her stomach, and the other agreed that it was no big deal before laughing. Yukari groaned. She recalled Lucia's gentle smile and realized that Lucia had only ever done that at the very last moment, when she had touched Yukari's forehead. Yukari wondered whether Lucia had truly been someone like her mother. Could the person who had molded an orphan like Yukari into an assassin really have been her mother? She questioned whether she had forgotten that agonizing life of murder. She wondered why Lucia had enslaved her and why Lucia had brainwashed her. She questioned whether she had been the only one who survived. Why? The question repeated itself in her mind. Tears formed in Yukari's eyes, and she cried as she continued to wonder why. The first man wondered what the heck was going on, while the other questioned whether Yukari had gone crazy. Tears continued to fall from Yukari's eyes. In her mind, she realized that she had never been loved by anyone. The only love she had ever clung to had been a lie. One of the men became concerned that it would be a problem if Yukari bit her tongue. They decided to silence her by gagging her with rope, forcing her to open her mouth before stuffing a rope inside. That night, Yukari wondered what she should do. Without her knowledge, someone was observing from outside. It was Second. From Second's perspective, the people he had seen entering the hidden building in the forest were 5 men, along with Yukari, who was tied up. There were 2 lookouts at the entrance, and there was no way of knowing how many people were inside. If he hesitated, it would be the end of him. He could not afford to lose the top-grade blacksmith act he had finally found. Second released an arrow. It pierced one man's head before continuing through the other man's mouth. He used spear archery, knife archery, and the combination technique. The 2 men fell to their death. Second looked at them grimly. In his mind, he knew he would not be able to forget this feeling for a while. However, he had no time to contemplate it now. Men inside wondered whether they had heard something and suggested taking a look. Hearing them, Second prepared his sword. He watched the door open and 2 men stepped outside. Second charged at them. Before they could react, he swung his sword and sliced off their heads. Second then went inside and found another door. He kicked it open, revealing 3 shocked men. He used his gold general swordsmanship skill, whose effect was an omnidirectional spread strike. One of the men could hardly believe that Second had survived, having been certain that he had died. Second defeated the 3 men. The remaining 3 men recognized him. Second saw Yukari lying on the floor, and the 3 men remaining attacked. He used his bishop swordsmanship, whose effect was the swift and powerful pierce strike. One of the men screeched as he lost an arm. Another pointed at Second in disbelief, unable to understand what had happened and wondering whether Second was a bloody monster. Then Second noticed something. It was Yukari. Her eyes were filled with tears, but he was delighted to realize that the caution and hostility in her eyes meant that the brainwashing had been broken. One of the men ordered Second not to move. He took Yukari hostage and demanded that Second hurry and throw away his sword. Second loosened his grip and threw the sword aside. The man was satisfied and was about to give further instructions when he was suddenly burned. Second realized that the man had been paying attention to the sword he had thrown upward and had failed to notice the incantation circle beneath Second's feet. The man screeched as his head burned and threw Yukari onto the floor. Second saw her fall and dashed forward. He stabbed the man, causing him to stagger. Second then used his silver general swordsmanship, curl form of water, and magic swordsmanship. After dealing with the men, Second went to help Yukari. He asked whether she was okay, but Yukari was unable to respond. Second waited for her. He then told her that they would leave because the air there was bad. He offered his hand to her. Outside, the sun had risen. At the beginning of chapter 23, Second apologized. It was because of his carelessness that Yukari had been put in danger. They were in the middle of the forest. Yukari insisted that she should be the one to sincerely apologize. Second asked whether it was because of her attitude up until then, and Yukari confirmed it. She was about to explain further, but Second told her that he already knew. Yukari had been brainwashed. Yukari was surprised. Second explained that, chances were, the brainwashing had been used to make sure she would remain cautious toward her master. It was the effect of the brainwashing sorcery that had affected her. Yukari was about to ask how he knew, but Second told her to take it slowly and suggested that they talk while walking. They reached the shore and Yukari fell into deep thought. She explained that she had been living as an assassin pawn for Duchess Lucia Icene up until then. Second questioned the meaning of being a pawn, and Yukari explained that Lucia had adopted her as an orphan without giving her a name and had simply raised her to conduct assassinations. Second understood. Yukari continued, explaining that she had likely been brainwashed. She had believed that she was happy and glad to have been Lucia's assassin in reality, right up until the moment she despaired after being kidnapped by those bandits. She had glorified her days as a shadow, but that had been a foolish misconception. No, it had been cruel brainwashing, and the true despair had come after the brainwashing was broken. Her eyes filled with tears as she realized that Lucia had never loved her. She had always been deceived, relying on a false love to keep herself going. Lucia had not been a splendid master or a kind mother. Second remained silent. Yukari asked him to allow her to speak about the truth behind the reason she had been silenced through brainwashing. Second asked whether she meant the cause of Duchess Lucia's execution, and Yukari confirmed it. Lucia might have been executed for her rebellion, but that was a complete lie. It had been a scheme by a hostile force. Her enemy had been Prime Minister Balmoro. Second asked how Yukari knew that. Yukari explained that she had been Lucia's shadow, and it had been her duty to shed blood in Lucia's place. She believed Second would already know this. Second signaled for her to continue. Yukari added that the reason she had been brainwashed and restricted from sharing this intelligence with a new master was likely because the information would put Lucia in a bad position. Second looked at Yukari and asked her to spare a moment to listen to what he thought. Yukari looked at him. Second acknowledged that her reasoning certainly made sense, but he believed that Lucia had definitely loved Yukari. Yukari insisted that it was impossible because she had been brainwashed. Second questioned whether the brainwashing might have been done in order to protect her. Yukari rejected the possibility. If that were the case, she wondered why Lucia had not given Yukari a name and had instead raised her to be an assassin. Second explained that both the act of not naming Yukari and the brainwashing that prevented her from leaking the intelligence had been done to protect her. Lucia had created the image of a pitiful slave who had been forced into assassination through the brainwashing of a duchess. Yukari murmured that it had not been an image. She had truly lived her life as a bitter, merciless assassin. Second argued that Yukari had been happy, had she not? She had said that she was glad to be the duchess's slave. That thought must have passed through her mind at least once. Yukari was about to argue, but Second told her to listen carefully. In brainwashing sorcery, a person could only use it once. In his mind, Second believed that the conditions of brainwashing sorcery in Mabian were the same in this world. That was why he had felt that something was out of place and managed to realize this possibility. Yukari was confused. Second continued by explaining that, in Yukari's case, the brainwashing Lucia had used to make her cautious towards Second was certain. This meant that Yukari had truly thought her life as a shadow was happy. Yukari could not believe it. In Second's mind, this deep analysis was half honest and half a sweet bait, the kind that she would unconsciously believe in. Yukari thought about it. She could not believe it. That was the only thing she could honestly say. However, if what Second claimed was true, then it would seem that she, her life, and her love and faith had not been a mistake. Second asked Yukari why she did not break out of jail. Yukari was confused by the suggestion. Second explained that he had been thinking of trying it after her brainwashing was broken. It was what they would call a loophole. To be exact, she would illegally escape her slavery and also get rid of her combat brand. Yukari was surprised and asked whether he was talking about that. Second acknowledged that the Maurice Company would have their eyes on them, but it did not matter because there were more important things right now. He asked Yukari to trust him. Second told her that he needed her to become his blacksmith no matter what. Yukari was surprised. In her mind, it was ridiculous. Normally, what Second should prioritize first was the opposite. She found it to be an unfunny joke. Breaking out of jail, in other words, meant that he wanted to release Yukari from her slavery without formally canceling his slavery sorcery, and that was impossible because otherwise the slave merchant business would not exist. Second asked whether Yukari would trust him if she managed to break out of jail. Yukari agreed that she did not mind and would trust him. Second mumbled that, in that case, Yukari should put her chest as hard as she could against his. She was weirded out. Yukari pointed out that she should not be able to do that according to the contract. Second assured her that she would be able to and that it was fine, telling her to simply try doing it as hard as she could while poking his chest. Yukari was speechless. She then decided that she would do so. Second suggested that Yukari come at him with a wham. Yukari closed her eyes and charged. She struck Second's chest with all her strength. Yukari was shocked that she had managed to do it. He had not been lying. She wondered whether it had certainly been an attack, and how it had been possible. Second confirmed that it looked like Yukari had managed to do it. Yukari hugged Second and wondered whether this had all been a misunderstanding from the beginning, and whether Second had never once lied to her up until then. With the little fragments of truth Second had been imparting, she could hardly believe it. Could Second really be planning to become the world's #1? Had Second left the dungeon to those two in order to train them? Had the random teleportation not been a lie either? Had being thrown 255 kilometers away not been a lie either? Had those stubborn arguments also been meant to help break her brainwashing? Had simply telling her to trust him, and everything else he had done, all been for the sake of raising her as a blacksmith? He had gone this far for her sake. Second asked whether Yukari trusted him now. Tears fell from Yukari's eyes as she answered that, although it was only temporary, she would trust him as her master. The jailbreak was a success. Originally, when a player bumped heads with a slave NPC, any subordination was released and would not conflict with story progression because of such an insanely bad flaw. It had not been patched in later updates either. It was considered a minor bug, a phenomenon not worth worrying about. At the port city of Kula, Yukari informed her master that the port city was now in sight. Second realized that they had finally arrived. Yukari stood by the window of their ship. As Second took in the sounds of the waves from afar, he became absorbed in thought. Duchess Lucia had really been murdered by Prime Minister Balmoral. If Yukari recalled that as someone who had been personally involved, then it was probably not a mistake. However, the reason was what intrigued him. Somehow, he could not help but feel that something extraordinary, massive, and peculiar surrounded everything from the shadows. Prime Minister Balmoral was famously known as the head of First Prince Klaus faction. Second was aware of the First Prince's twisted personality. If the First Prince was the most influential person in that faction, he could get away with any dirty deed. As for his father, King Bal Castal, Second was fairly certain that Castal had been portrayed as a selfish mammonist who always put profit first. Based on his experience so far, Not everything in this world had turned out exactly like Mobius. This king was a PC second, had not really cared about in the game, while simply striving to become number one in this world. Now, however, the king was someone second absolutely could not ignore. More importantly, second was worried about Main as well, the second prince. It rubbed him the wrong way to see a friend dragged into a retarded political war. Second would need to investigate, both for the sake of his dream of becoming the world's number one and for the sake of Main's future. He then asked Yukari about the prime minister, but Yukari remained quiet. Second told her to leave it all to him. It would not happen immediately, but he would figure something out. He noticed that Yukari turned away. She warned him not to speak frivolous words, her ear turning red. Second averted his eyes. At the farming town of Piho, Sylvia was upset that Second and Yukari were late and wondered what they had been doing and whether they were worried. Sylvia's mood upon seeing Yukari for the first time in about a week was as blatantly bad as it had been when they first met. Iko ran toward Second and hugged him. Second apologized and asked whether there had been any problems. Sylvia responded that there had been a mountain of problems several times over. However, Sylvia noticed something. She looked at Yukari and Yukari looked back at her. They remained silent. Sylvia then announced that she had something to discuss among fellow women. Second was confused. Tension arose as they discussed things, leaving Second at a distance while he watched them. In his mind, this had to be one of those girls-only gatherings he had heard rumors about. He had never expected killing intent to surge during one. Meanwhile, Yukari pointed out that it appeared she had not yet won. Sylvia countered that she had been Second's apprentice longer than Yukari and called Yukari a harlot. Yukari retorted that it did not change the fact that Sylvia had made no progress despite being with him for so long. Iko intervened and told them to stop, pointing out that those kinds of insults hurt. Seeing them, Second assumed that it must have been friendly banter. He was glad that they seemed able to get along even with Yukari now being part of the group. Later, Iko asked about the strategy. Second explained that it was already evening, so they would not be raiding a dungeon that night. Iko became sad. Second suggested holding a strategy meeting while having dinner instead, and Iko happily agreed before walking with him. Later, at the guild, Second explained that, at any rate, they were going to earn experience. Sylvia asked what they would do about Yukari. Second explained that until Yukari's blacksmith skill reached the 9th grade, they would earn the experience for her. The Limped Fath dungeon area in Piho would be the most effective place for that at the moment, so they would go there to earn it for the time being. Afterward, Yukari specialized in blacksmithing. She apologized for the trouble and asked them to take good care of her. Sylvia assured Yukari that she did not need to worry about it. After Iko's second promotion, Yukari asked Second whether the name of the team had been decided. In Second's mind, he had completely forgotten about it because of the teleportation incident. He realized that, now that he thought about it, he had not decided on one yet. Sylvia said that she had a suggestion, but Second immediately denied it. Sylvia complained that he had not even heard it yet. Yukari offered to hear Sylvia out instead. Sylvia's eyes glittered as she began explaining that she was a knight who had taken a blood oath, but Second stopped her again. In his mind, he did not really understand why, but it felt like her suggestion would be dangerous. Yukari pointed out that none of them except Sylvia were knights, so the name would not be suitable. Sylvia understood and presented another suggestion involving the chivalric Order 0. Suddenly, a bottle went straight to her mouth. Yukari offered her own suggestion. The S would represent the birth of Second's team, the O would represent becoming overly successful, and the final S would represent becoming the strongest. In short, the name would be SO Steam. In Second's mind, he wondered why girls had to push things to the limit like that. He put an end to the suggestions and decided that they would let Iko choose, only to find that Iko was asleep. He figured he could only think of one himself. Second began considering a name before deciding that they would go with the team name fastest. Yukari stared at him. Sylvia was already drunk, while Iko remained asleep. Yukari pointed out that it would be slightly embarrassing if they were not the best. Second dismissed the concern. It would be fine because he was going to become the world's number one after all. Second reflected that he had decided on a pretty random team name on impulse because he was strong in situations like these. Being impulsive was important. The next day, they went to the second round dungeon Limped Fath. Iko shielded attacks while Sylvia fired arrows, and they fought against different kinds of monsters. Second thought it was really nice to revisit Limped Fath after such a long time. The appeal was that they could hunt quickly and rake in tons of experience. If they could maintain this pace for all 9 grades of Yukari's blacksmith skill, it would not even take a month to acquire, would it? Looking at Yukari, Second asked what was wrong. Yukari explained that she simply had not expected things to progress this quickly. Second suddenly recalled that he had not yet checked Yukari's skill composition and rank. He looked at his window system and was able to see them now, considering himself lucky. Among Yukari's skills, the ones that had reached the grade bracket were 1st grade pawn archery and 1st grade knight assassination. Those were the only 2. The rest were all in the class bracket. It was incredible to see these second-rank monsters being mowed down one after another before his eyes. Yukari had probably never imagined that such a thing was possible. That was how powerful high-ranking skills truly were. More importantly, the reason Second considered himself lucky was Yukari's potential. She had not raised her skills as much as he had expected, so she was earning experience faster than he had anticipated. Second told Yukari that if she evolved into an exceptional blacksmith, then along with the second class, even the first class would be enough for them to explore around like this with ease. His dream of becoming the world's #1 had come much closer, so he would be counting on Yukari. Yukari looked at him and understood. She, too, would aim to become the world's #1 alongside her master, the world's #1 blacksmith. Second looked at Yukari in his mind. In the past, she would have dismissed such words as frivolous. Yet now Yukari had mentioned the term world's #1 twice. Those had once been words that angered her, making her insist that people could not become that strong. Second smiled. Seeing that slight smile, he felt glad from the bottom of his heart that he had made her his comrade. In the beginning of Chapter 25, it had been 2 weeks since they returned to their dungeon exploration life in Limped Fath. One of the items they had wanted, the rock shell shield, had finally dropped from a rock tortoise. That was excellent, but an inexplicable situation followed. Yukari assured Iko that she had no intention of taking the shield for herself and only wanted to upgrade it. Sylvia supported Yukari, explaining that even her Flame Wolf's bow had become considerably more powerful after Yukari upgraded it. Iko remained unconvinced. Over the past 2 weeks, Yukari had prioritized improving ability upgrade among her blacksmith skills, and the other day she had finally reached the 5th grade. Starting from the 5th grade, ability upgrade success rate skyrocketed, and Yukari could also perform advanced class upgrade. Conversely, it became possible to upgrade an item to its second-last stage. Iko still questioned whether they were really telling the truth. Yukari assured her that they were and asked for Iko's shield. Iko refused and admitted that Yukari looked scary now. In Second's mind, Iko somehow seemed like a cat clinging to a toy. He wondered whether it was an instinct among the beast folk. He sighed and decided it did not matter. For the time being, they kept quiet about it, since there was no real need to hurry. Iko apologized and handed over her shield. Sylvia observed that Iko had apparently gotten ahead of herself by thinking that her very first present might be taken away from her, and expressed her thanks. Second understood and figured it probably was behavior specific to the beast folk after all. He instructed Yukari to perform the 3rd stage, VIT-focused upgrade. Yukari complied. The shield glowed and Yukari completed the upgrade. Second expected nothing less from her, while Yukari modestly dismissed the accomplishment as insignificant. Second smiled. He had noticed lately that whenever Yukari was happy or embarrassed, the tips of her pointy ears would twitch and turn slightly red. He returned Iko's shield to her. Iko was surprised by how quickly it had been completed and thanked Yukari, who accepted her thanks. Yukari's ear twitched. Sylvia asked whether they were changing locations. Second confirmed that they were and explained that they could explore around Limped Fath very quickly now. The experience was not bad either, and they had already gained several tens of millions of CL from selling rock tortoise shells. Second explained that there were 3 reasons for leaving. First, they would gain even more lucrative experience than they were getting now. Sylvia understood and found that appealing. Second continued by explaining that he wanted to craft equipment from materials acquired from the monsters there. Sylvia understood that as well. The boss of the dungeon, they were heading to dropped a large amount of mithril. Mithril equipment was a staple for intermediate to advanced players, and there was no reason not to have it. In fact, it was several times better than lesser quality equipment. The 3rd reason was that they could make so much gold that they would drown in it. Sylvia understood, but this particularly caught her attention. She wanted to know whether they would really make more than they were making already. Second confirmed that they would and decided that they should buy a home after all. Sylvia was shocked by the mention of a home. Even Yukari questioned it while Iko became excited. Second explained that they were going to have an insane mansion built on the outskirts of the royal capital and use it as their headquarters. Iko was delighted. Second reflected that he had practically never used the housing system in his past life, but he had finally realized how genuinely useful it was in this world. Since he was going out of his way to obtain a home, he might as well have it built like a luxurious mansion. Their goal was 50 billion CL, and they would make it through mithril alchemy. He asked for their thoughts, prompting Yukari and Sylvia to raise their hands. Second called on Yukari first. Yukari questioned why their goal was 50 billion CL. Second explained that it was simple. The most expensive estate in a royal capital cost 25 billion CL, but their home would be worth twice that amount. Sylvia was shocked. Second reasoned that if the most expensive mansion cost 25 billion CL, they could not consider their home the world's #1 estate unless they spent at least twice that amount. That was all there was to it. He then asked for Yukari's opinion. Since they had already asked what mithril alchemy was, Second acknowledged that it was a great question. Mithril alchemy was an extremely famous method of making money in Mabayon. Second explained that the mithril ore dropped by the mithril golem boss in the second-rank dungeon Proline, located near the blacksmithing town of Badgold, was what they would use for mithril alchemy. They would first use the blacksmith skill smelting and refining to extract the impurities and turn the ore into pure mithril. They would then use manufacture to combine it with iron and produce mithril alloy. Yukari wondered about the mithril alloy. Second knew that mithril alloy could be manufactured by combining pure mithril and iron in a 1:20 ratio. It was an extremely tough and precious alloy. Sylvia then called Second's attention. When he asked what was wrong, she pointed out that the Proline dungeon had not yet been conquered. Yukari wore a cold expression while Iko smiled. Sylvia questioned how Second could know so much about an unconquered dungeon. Second was at a loss for words. He wondered what he should do. He could make an excuse or simply come clean, but he did not know which choice to make. Sylvia revealed that ever since she had met Second, she had vaguely noticed that he had some reason for knowing so much. Sylvia was right. Second did have a reason, and it was a very long story, one that would be difficult for anyone to believe immediately. Even though he knew the criticism was not justified, he could not settle down after realizing that he would be judged. That feeling made him wonder whether he was guilty somewhere in his heart. If so, perhaps he should simply give in and tell them everything. But he could not. His circumstances transcended far beyond these girls' understanding. People feared the unknown, and because of that, he should not tell them. Revealing everything felt as though it would only drive him farther away from becoming the world's number one. Sylvia told Second that she trusted him. She wanted him to tell them if he was willing, and she would accept the truth regardless of what circumstances lay behind it. Second felt that Sylvia was strong. She possessed the courage to seek the truth even if it might destroy the trust they had between them. She had an extremely straightforward and steadfast heart, something she absolutely possessed that he did not. It was a heart he could never possibly emulate and should never try to emulate. It was pure, sincere, prosperous, strong, and righteous. Second apologized to Sylvia, but he would not divulge an admitted secret regardless of who asked. He acknowledged that it was a secret and made it clear that he could not reveal it under any circumstance. Even so, Second knew that he would not be himself if he did not dodge the subject here. He could not end the game if he did not evade the equation when it was up to him. He would not be able to return to the way he had been back when he left the world's number one. While sitting on the couch, Second explained that he could not tell Sylvia that he had written down the truth one day, because it was a secret from everyone that he would take to his grave. He apologized again. Sylvia remained there and assured Second that she did not mind at all. If the secret ever began eating him up inside, he was free to take back what he had just said whenever he wanted. Second thought that she was still Sylvia Virginia, a good girl. He knew that from the bottom of his heart. The blacksmithing town of Bad Gold could now be seen from a distance. Second took one more step and decided that once they secured some buyers for the mithril alloy at the blacksmithing guild, they would head to Proline right away. When they approached potential buyers, one man insisted that Second's group had to be joking because securing a supply of mithril alloy was absolutely impossible. Another man had no time for jokes, while another simply laughed. Second thought there were plenty of good potential buyers, yet not a single place would accept their offer. Yukari quietly acknowledged that this was how things had turned out. When Second really thought about it, the situation made sense. If someone whose origin was completely unknown approached him and claimed they could wholesale mithril alloy to him, even Second would not trust it. He asked Yukari what she thought they should do. Yukari believed they should extensively raid Proline Dungeon once to build a reputation first. If they demonstrated their potential, they would likely gain the buyer's trust. Second understood that this meant going through the Adventurer Guild. He grimaced. Deep down, he absolutely did not want to do that. Ever since his past life, he had only had unpleasant memories of the Adventurer Guild. He asked Yukari whether she could think of any other method, but she had none in particular. Second then asked Sylvia and Iko for their thoughts. Sylvia did not know, and Iko did not have a clue either. Second concluded that the two of them were clueless. He asked what would happen if they raided Proline without registering at the Adventurer Guild. Yukari explained that it would make things more complicated. Second agreed. If someone raided without registering, there was no telling what the Adventurer Guild might do. They might pressure their customers and interfere with their business, or they might even send out assassins. If it was the same Mabian Adventurer Guild that he knew, all of those possibilities were perfectly feasible. Second accepted that there was no choice. They would head to the Adventurer Guild after securing lodging. Upon arriving at the Adventurers Guild, they went to the reception desk to register. The receptionist welcomed them and had Second fill out the necessary information. She then gave them their guild cards, which served as IDs and passports for adventurers within the guild. Second's team rank and personal rank were both F rank. The ranks went from F to A, meaning he was currently at the lowest rank. The receptionist offered him a new adventurer manual and directions to their many classes, but Second declined. The receptionist thanked him for his patronage, but he was far from pleased. He was furious that he could not head to Proline quickly. He was furious that they were being refused despite their ability to wholesale mithril alloy. He was furious that he had been forced to register with the Adventurer Guild, something he wanted nothing to do with. He was furious that he was actually an F-rank. A voice suddenly rang out, drawing attention to the dark elf accompanying Second. A fat man approached him and identified him as a newbie, taking it upon himself to educate him. The fat man snickered together with the other adventurers. Second thought that what irritated him the most was being forced to deal with these weirdos. That was precisely why he despised the Adventurer Guild. The fat man continued treating Second as an obvious beginner and expected him to be grateful for the man's attention. Second regarded him with irritation and concluded that he must look like a total sucker. The fat man probably thought he had gotten lucky with a weak guy like Second who had several attractive girls with him. He could use newbie education as an excuse to extort Second easily, making him nothing more than a one-of-a-kind, mistaken delinquent who had gotten ahead of himself and was now throwing his weight around. The man became angry and accused Second of trying to pick a fight, calling him a bastard. Second denied trying to pick a fight, although he acknowledged that the man was not entirely wrong. Still, Second considered the fat man nothing more than a habitual offender. Second did not think the fat man was entirely at fault, however. He believed the Adventurer Guild was to blame for neglecting people like him. Teachers had to properly look after even their hopeless students and remain perfectly attentive. He wondered whether he was wrong. Second looked around. The fat man shouted at him for ignoring him. Second told the man that he kept chirping like an annoying bird and should hurry up and come to him. That way, the fat man would not be able to claim legitimate self-defense. The fat man charged and swung his fist. Second saw that the man was covered with openings and realized he could take him down at any time. Iko suddenly yelled at the man to stop and used her head to shield Second from the man's fist. The man struck her in the head and groaned from the pain in his hand. Iko smiled. Seeing this, the other adventurers became angry and charged toward them. A rope suddenly restrained them, leaving them unable to move. Yukari explained that she had tied them up just to be safe. Sylvia remarked that it seemed she had no role to play. Second became concerned and wondered what Sylvia intended to do with her bow in such a small room. Sylvia revealed that she had been practicing the Flame Wolf's bow kick precisely for situations like this. She then jumped and performed a flying kick while using the Flame Wolf's bow kick. Later, Second thanked them and asked whether they should leave. The group followed him outside the guild. Once outside, Second noticed something strange about his legs. When he looked down, he was surprised to see that they were shaking. He wondered whether he had been afraid of that giant. No, that was not it. He had been afraid of himself. If he had allowed himself to become angry and fought them without restraint, it could have ended in a massacre. If he took someone down, it would not be through a player's skill but through murder. This was not a game. He knew that, but he did not think he had genuinely realized it yet. When he reached home, he lay down on his bed and thought about everything. Becoming an absolutely flawless world's number one in this other world would probably be difficult to some extent. The next day, during mealtime, Second told the others that they should head into Proline that day. The three looked at him. Yukari understood, but she believed that even if they raided it themselves, the blacksmithing guild might not approve. Second wondered why. Yukari explained that dungeon raids were conducted in large parties. They were regularly organized as mass raids led by the Adventurer Guild. Therefore, even if a completely unknown team declared that they had conquered the dungeon on their own, it would simply seem like a lie. Second understood. Even if they showed the mithril alloy before the blacksmithing guild's very eyes, Yukari explained that it would not necessarily prove anything. Mithril did not come strictly from the Proline boss, as normal monsters also dropped it. Second felt deflated and wondered what would happen if they gathered tons of mithril for weeks on end. Yukari acknowledged that they could certainly do that for several weeks and admitted that she had forgotten about the possibility because it seemed too outlandish. In that case, it seemed possible to skip the mass raid and conduct business with the blacksmithing guild. However, Yukari wondered whether the Adventurer Guild would simply turn a blind eye if they interfered. Second understood the problem. Sylvia wondered whether they could not join the mass raid and have Second show off his furious efforts. Second pointed out that this would only work if they accepted a team of F-rank. Sylvia acknowledged the point. Second thought about the situation. Warriors from the kingdom would be assembling for a mass raid on the unconquered dungeon, and even if they conquered it themselves, nobody would believe them. On top of that, they would make enemies of the Adventurer Guild. There seemed to be no way out. Yukari suggested that they contribute to the Adventurer Guild as much as possible. She believed that was the best plan for being accepted into future mass raid. Second wondered how many months that would take. He could not build any motivation for such a plan. He questioned whether this was all because he was still thinking of this world as a game. Then he suddenly twitched. An idea came to him. Second realized that if his adventurer rank were higher, they would be able to participate in the mass raid. If he conquered the dungeon on his own as an A rank, it would be recognized. Yukari agreed that this was an extreme case but confirmed that it would be correct. However, if Second aimed to become an A rank, she believed it would be more efficient to steadily contribute to the Adventurer Guild and earn the right to participate in mass raids. Second rejected that approach because he had just remembered a good method. Yukari wondered what method he had in mind. Second remembered something from when he played Mabian. At the time, it had been even more useless than shit. The method was the Sky Rocket Bomber. Second excitedly decided that they should hurry over to Proline Dungeon. At the start of Chapter 27, the Sky Rocket Bomber was a method that would allow them to raise their adventurer rank at blazing speed. The method was simple. An item that regularly regenerated on its own inside dungeons could be collected and provided to the Adventurer Guild. Those items were mana crystals. With this unrivaled method of raising their rank, they would be able to reach their goal in as soon as 6 days. Around 128 mana crystals regenerated every day in the Proline Dungeon. By bringing in 83 a day, their contribution to the guild would be enough to reach A rank A in 6 days. If they could provide about 500 mana crystals, they would achieve A rank. The reason they were only providing 83 a day was that mana crystals did not appear all at once. They regenerated little by little at fixed intervals, forcing them to wait for them no matter how hard they tried. Around 80 was more or less the limit per day. The mana crystals were located inside secret rooms within the dungeon. These secret rooms contained tons of mana crystals, and the means of reaching those rooms was the reasoning behind the Sky Rocket Bomber name. They would use a technique called an explosive jump. Iko asked about the explosive jump, and Second explained that from then on, whenever Iko jumped, he would cast the coral form of wind at her feet. Then Sylvia and Second would fire at Iko's feet with a coral form of fire using bows. Iko would defend against those attacks with Bishop Shield Art, Knight Shield Art, and Gold, General, Shield Art in that order. She would perform all of those while facing downward. In essence, Second thought, it was a secret technique that allowed someone to soar higher than an ordinary jump. If executed well, they could even reach up to 20 meters high. Iko enthusiastically accepted the explanation. Sylvia questioned whether it was really safe. Considering Iko's MGR, Second thought it should be fine, but he decided they should give it a test run first. They would practice there. Second instructed Iko to jump, and Iko jumped. He then used the coral form of wind skill on Iko, bringing her higher. Iko used her Bishop Shield Art. Sylvia used her coral form of fire and night archery toward Iko's shield, and Iko soared higher. Second used his coral form of fire and night archery as well. Iko then used her gold general shield art. Her eyes sparkled as she was pushed even higher. Seeing Iko at the top, Yukari became concerned about whether she would be okay. Iko began falling, and Second panicked when he realized he had not thought of a landing spot. Sylvia was shocked as well. Second urgently called for Iko to cast her bishop skill while he hurriedly cast coral form of water. Water met Iko as she fell. It splashed upon impact, and the three called out for her. Iko surfaced, excited to do it again. They were relieved, and Second decided they would do it again next time. Iko enthusiastically accepted. Later, Iko could be seen jumping extremely high. She then obtained all the mana crystals they needed. From below, Second called for Iko to come back down. He then decided that they would go and hand the mana crystals over to the guild. Upon seeing them, the receptionist was shocked by the quantity of mana crystals. Second asked whether his team would become rank C with them, and the receptionist confirmed that he was correct. Second explained that they would provide all of them to the guild. They were also depositing all of their money, so he requested that both of their individual ranks and the team's rank be raised. The receptionist understood. Second winked at Camellia and thanked her, intending to bring some more the following day as well. The receptionist blushed. Second thought that the act was weird and pretentious and gave him goosebumps when he personally did it, but it seemed that he obtained excellent results whenever he acted that way with this look. Inside the Notorious Adventurers Guild, maintaining a good relationship with a receptionist was a strategic act because she might be helpful to them in the future. However, he was now receiving grim looks from Yukari and Sylvia. He could feel the pressure coming from the two of them. Afterward, as they walked outside, Second explained that while they gathered crystals over the next 5 days, they would gain experience by defeating the golems that appeared in the Proline dungeon. Once they became A-ranked, they would quickly raid Proline and explore it, then make a killing through mithril alloy and buy a house in the royal capital once they had saved enough. They would proceed with a plan like this. Sylvia agreed with earning experience in the meantime, but she wondered whether they would still focus on Yukari's blacksmithing skill for now. Second decided there was no need to focus on blacksmithing anymore. They would split the experience evenly among the party. Sylvia understood that this meant they would once again improve each of their skills. Yukari noted that Sylvia was working on her magic archery and Iko on her shield arts, then wondered what Second would be improving. Second considered it for a moment before deciding that he would improve his conjuration starting the next day. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. Although they were gathering mana crystals with the Sky Rocket Bomber method, while Eco fetched them, Sylvia and Second, who were unoccupied, constantly hunted golems to the point that they wondered whether they might make the golems go extinct. In the end, they managed to earn a significant amount of experience. While the 3 of them were stowed away in the Proline dungeon, Second had Yukari, who was free, do one thing for them: investigate the blacksmithing and adventurer guilds. As expected from a former assassin, this sort of investigation was a piece of cake for her. They obtained 2 crucial pieces of information. The next Proline mass raid was approaching in 3 days, and the blacksmithing guild was racking its brains over its chronic lack of mithril. With this intelligence, Second had to reconsider their plans from then on. They could continue and become A-rank adventurers, participate in mass raids to prove their ability to conquer the dungeon, and earn the trust of the blacksmithing guild in order to wholesale them mithril alloy, as initially planned. This option would avoid causing too much conflict, but it would take time to earn money. Alternatively, they could exploit the reputation of being A-rank adventurers to earn the trust of the blacksmithing guild, conquer the dungeon solo without waiting for any mass raids, and offer a contract to the entire guild as if they owned the dungeon. This option would let them earn a huge amount of money, but it would definitely make enemies out of the adventurer guild. Second agreed that those were the possibilities. Suddenly, Yukari called out to him and asked for one more day. Second wondered whether she had something in mind. Yukari explained that she understood Second appeared to dislike wasting too much time, and in that case, she had a rudimentary plan. Second sought to know what the plan was. Yukari's plan was to utilize the merchant guild. At the start of chapter 28, Yukari explained that there was no reason for merchants not to agree to such an easy method of making money. They would be charged some commission, but this should definitely yield more profit than earning it slowly. Their team, the fastest party, would become A-rank adventurers the following day. They had already cleared the issue of reliability. Second wondered whether this would make enemies out of the adventurer guild after all. Yukari saw no reason for such concern. They would participate in a mass raid 3 days later, making it appear to the public that they were building rapport with the adventurer and blacksmithing guild. In secret, however, they would be binding a contract with the merchant guild. Second remained confused about why this would not make enemies out of the adventurer guild. Yukari explained that the more mithril alloy they wholesaled to the merchant guild, the more they would earn. As long as they established this pipeline, Second would not be condemned, and even if the adventurer guild attacked them, the merchant guild would protect them. Second realized that this was how the situation differed from dealing with the blacksmithing guild. The merchant guild would certainly want to protect its source of profit. Moreover, if the blacksmithing guild became dependent on the large quantities of mithril alloy wholesaled through the merchant guild, they would be able to make allies out of 2 guilds at once. That meant that even if the adventurer guild wanted to condemn Second, they would not be able to do so. Second decided that they would go with Yukari's strategy. Yukari took responsibility for the plan and intended to bring it to the merchant guild the following day for them to examine. Second was genuinely glad that Yukari was intelligent in this sort of field. She diligently filled in the areas he lacked, while he was only good at playing online games. He thanked Yukari and considered her rather dependable. Yukari accepted his thanks, and Second noticed that her ear twitched. The next day, they supplied more mana crystals, and Second officially became an A-rank adventurer without any difficulty. They dropped by Proline again to gain more experience while Yukari was busy negotiating with the merchant guild. The reason was that, as a result of putting in every little bit of experience, including the extra they had gained, his conjuration skills and spirits were almost at the 4th grade. The main skills of conjuration were classified into 2 branches. The first branch was called monster summoning, while the second branch was called spirit summoning. Monster summoning was a skill that allowed someone to summon and control monsters they had tamed, while spirit summoning was a skill that allowed someone to summon and control a single spirit unique to each character. By raising spirit summoning to the 4th grade, the skill spirit possession became unlocked. It was said to allow a temporarily summoned spirit to possess one's own body, drastically boosting their status. It was an incredibly powerful buff skill considered a must-have for high-class players and one of the skills absolutely imperative to have for the world's #1. That day, Second acquired a premium spirit possession after his conjuration reached the 4th grade. Nonetheless, he still had not attained an actual spirit, so the possession meant nothing. Moments to summon a spirit were rare. He planned to use the premium spirit ticket that had been included when he bought the premium limited-time avatar from the beginning of his life. He had been promised a spirit strength of at least 25,000 to 1. It was such an expensive item that anyone would have been screaming about the money involved. Spirit strength was a value indicating the power and rarity of a spirit. 100001 plus was rare, 200001 was super rare, 250001 was ultra rare, and 300001 was super ultra rare. It was something someone would encounter in a typical social game gacha. The issue was when he should use that ticket to summon the spirit. There was one concern. Back when he was playing in Mabian, spirits were naturally characters that only spoke scripted lines, but this was the real world now. He figured that perhaps even a spirit might possess a will. If that were true, he would have one more comrade in his party. During such a volatile time, he was totally reluctant to add new members to the party after all. There was not really a need to rush either, but stalling for too long was also a problem, since it might take time to open their heart like a certain someone. Sylvia informed Second that she was getting a message from Yukari. Yukari had reached an agreement with the Merchants Guild, but there was one issue. Upon arriving at the Merchant Guild, Second found out that the issue concerned a proof of strength. Yukari confirmed this and explained that she had received a truly wonderful response and an appealing contract draft from the Merchant Guild. However, all of it was applicable only if they could prove their team's might. Second wondered whether the title of A-rank adventurer was not enough. A man appeared and offered to elaborate from that point onward. He was the acting master of the Merchant Guild, and his name was Shinsei. Shinsei turned to Second and asked whether he was Second, expressing his hope that they could get along nicely. Iko was terrified as the two men shook hands. Shinsei explained that he had received a truly attractive deal this time, and everyone could not help but be thankful for it. The Merchant Guild, including himself, was greatly looking forward to the results. However, with all due respect, no matter how great an A-rank adventurer Second was, Shinsei's heart told him that it was not enough for him to put his faith in Second. Second was talking about procuring that much mithril alloy for the Merchant Guild. After all, anyone with a voice could tell that such a claim sounded like a lie. Shinsei looked at Iko, whose frightened expression caused her to move closer to Second. Since Shinsei had a tiny bit of hope in the proposal, he wanted to see Second prove his strength. Second was to conquer Proline as if it were a piece of cake. If Second could manage that, the Merchant Guild would happily accept the offer. However, if Shinsei discovered that it was all a lie, he would show no mercy. For an ordinary person, Second thought, that would have been an effective enough threat, but sadly it had no effect on him because he could beat Shinsei. If they were talking about world rankings, this brawny man would not even reach 10,000th place. Second knew that the man lacked combat skills, and the reason was as plain and simple as that. Second wondered whether he should go and conquer Proline right then and, if so, estimated that it would take him 3 hours. He then asked Shinsei what he should do to prove his strength. Shinsei looked at him. Second realized that what Shinsei wanted from him right now was proof that he was capable of exploring Proline repeatedly. If that was the case, Second needed to give off a massive air of pretension that made it obvious he could do so. A stare-down began between the two of them. Suddenly, a smirk formed on Shinsei's mouth, and he heartily laughed. Shinsei found it much easier than he had expected and considered it magnificent, noting that Second was just as Yukari had described. Sylvia was shocked to realize that Yukari had been testing Second. Yukari sincerely apologized to Second and explained that it had been necessary. Sylvia was ignored. Shinsei agreed with Yukari and revealed that he had made a request to her. He felt there was a need to ascertain whether Second was truly capable of procuring a stable supply of mithril alloy. Second finally understood. This meant he had been acknowledged by Shinsei, right? Iko, however, was still whimpering. Second became angry with Shinsei and demanded that he apologize to Iko, referring to him as Octopus Head. Shinsei quickly bowed down and repeatedly apologized. After various things happened, they came to an agreement with the Merchant Guild, or so it seemed. In reality, there was still a major problem. Shinsei explained that Second nevertheless needed to actually prove his strength. Second wondered whether it was in order to earn Shinsei's trust. Shinsei clarified that it was not for that. If his judgment was correct, Second would be a massive score. Second realized that everyone apart from Shinsei could not trust him. He understood the situation now. Sylvia confirmed that this was the situation. Second asked Shinsei about the specifics. Shinsei explained that, at the very least, he wanted a few of his staff and prospective clients to witness it. Second asked how many people that would be, and Shinsei estimated around 200, more or less. Yukari agreed, explaining that Sylvia used a magical bow while Iko used a shield as a sort of demonstration. Shinsei then asked what kind of special techniques Second possessed. Second had archery, swordsmanship, sorcery, and conjuration, and he could even use magic archery and magic swordsmanship as well. Sylvia was only capable of the fire element, but Second could handle every single element for his sorcery, and all of them were absolutely top-notch. Sylvia proudly explained this, and Shinsei considered it tremendous. Yukari asked Second whether his conjuration had already risen. Second confirmed that spirit summoning had reached the 4th grade that day. Shinsei was shocked upon learning that Second was now in the 4th grade. Iko was shocked again as well. Second stood up and demanded that Shinsei apologize, again referring to him as a bastard and damned octopus head. Shinsei apologized. Shinsei then revealed that he thought they might have found a solution. Second sought to know what the solution was. Shinsei explained that they were talking about spirit summoning. Second understood that Shinsei wanted him to demonstrate spirit summoning in front of the crowd. Certainly, the greater the spirit strength a spirit possessed and the higher the spirit summoning rank, the more flashy and colorful the summoning scene became. In particular, the very first summon tended to be exceptionally spectacular. Back in Mabian, each spirit had its own exclusive summoning scene. If those scenes remained intact in this world, then nobody would have any complaints about witnessing one as a demonstration. Shinsei explained that if second spirit summoning was as high of an A rank as the 4th grade, chances were that everyone who witnessed it would agree with second's competency. Second could now see that the people there recognized the 4th grade of spirit summoning as a high rank. If that was the case, it was a surprisingly good idea. With the help of second's premium spirit ticket, he would be able to summon a spirit with a high initial spirit strength, and he was sure it would produce a tremendously flashy scene. Second agreed to continue their discussion in that direction. He accepted Shinsei's proposal, and they worked out a plan together. Second had never dreamed that things would end up like that.